The emergency line rang just after noon. I reached for it, still flipping through paperwork from a minor incident with some day hikers earlier that morning. Cascade Mountains Ranger Station, Ranger Miller, speaking, I said, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder. The voice on the other end belonged to dispatch coordinator Karen Jenkins, her normally calm tone now carrying a note of concern. Dave, we've got a missing person situation. 2 hikers, Chris and Sarah Rodriguez, didn't return from a camping trip. They were expected back 2 days ago. I straightened in my chair. 2 days overdue? Family just now reporting it? They tried calling the couple's cell phones repeatedly, but there's no service in that area. The family was giving them extra time since they've gone off-grid before, but now they're worried. Any idea where they were headed? That's part of the problem, Karen said. They didn't file a proper permit. From what the family said, they mentioned camping near Timber Creek. I closed my eyes for a moment. Timber Creek. Of course it would be there. The area was gorgeous but remote, with steep ravines and unpredictable weather patterns. Over my 15 years working these mountains, I'd learned to respect that section of the park more than most. Send me everything you have, I said. I'll get Charlie and we'll head out right away. After hanging up, I grabbed my park-issued phone and called Charlie Wilson. He answered on the second ring. Charlie, we've got a search and rescue. Missing couple near Timber Creek. Can you meet me at the station in 20 minutes? Timber Creek? His voice sharpened with recognition. I'm on my way. While waiting for Charlie, I pulled the topographical maps of the Timber Creek region from our files. The email from Karen arrived with the basic information on the Rodriguez couple. Both in their early 30s, experienced hikers according to family, but they'd gone into restricted camping territory without proper permits. She'd attached a photo the family had provided, a smiling couple with their arms around each other, standing on what looked like another mountain trail from a previous trip. I spent the next 15 minutes gathering essential equipment, GPS units, first aid supplies, emergency rations, extra water, and our most powerful handheld radios. Our satellite phone went into my pack. Cell service was non-existent in the backcountry. Charlie arrived right on time, his truck pulling into the lot outside the ranger station. He walked in looking ready for work, already dressed in his uniform with hiking boots laced tight. What have we got? He asked, immediately helping me organize the gear. Chris and Sarah Rodriguez. Married couple, early 30s. Experienced hikers according to the family, but they went out without permits. Last known destination was somewhere near Timber Creek. Charlie paused. That's the 3rd case near Timber Creek in what, 10 years? 4th, I corrected. There was that solo hiker back in 2018. They found him eventually. Exposure and a broken leg after going off trail. Right. And the others? I zipped up my pack. 1 found dead from a fall. 1 rescued with severe hypothermia. 1 never found. Charlie nodded, his expression grim. And now possibly 2 more. Any reason to think they're still okay? Weather's been good. Unusually clear for this time of year. And if they're actually experienced like the family claims, they might have just gotten turned around or had a minor injury that's slowing them down. I handed Charlie the case file Karen had compiled, including the couple's photo and contact information for their family members. You finished loading up the truck. I want to check one more thing. While Charlie loaded our gear, I pulled up our incident database and reviewed the previous Timber Creek cases. Something about this situation was making me uneasy. The weather had been stable, and if the Rodriguez couple truly were experienced hikers, they should have been fine even without permits. People broke the rules all the time to camp in restricted areas, usually without incident beyond a citation when we caught them. When I walked out to the parking lot, Charlie had finished loading our truck. He tossed me the keys. He knew I preferred to drive on search operations. As we pulled away from the station, Charlie reviewed the notes. Says here they drove a blue Honda CR-V, license plate included. We should check the trailhead parking lot first." "Good thinking," I said, taking the turn onto the main road that would lead us to the eastern access point for the Timber Creek trail system. The drive took almost an hour, winding through increasingly remote forest roads. As we traveled, I filled Charlie in on my concerns. "I can't put my finger on it, but something feels off about this one," I said, keeping my eyes on the narrow road. "Most unauthorized campers are just looking to avoid fees or want to feel like they're breaking the rules a little. They still stick close to main trails." "But Timber Creek is different," Charlie noted. "It's not just off limits for fee reasons. The terrain there is legitimately dangerous." "Exactly. Why would experienced hikers choose that spot? The views aren't any better than the approved camping areas." Charlie tapped his fingers on the dashboard. "Maybe they didn't know it was restricted?" "Possible, but the signage is pretty clear at all the access points." We drove in silence for a few minutes, both of us thinking through the possibilities. "You know what bothers me most?" I finally said. 3 people have gone missing in that area in the past decade. That's not normal, even for backcountry statistics. You think there's something specific about that location? Besides the obvious terrain risks? I shrugged. "Not sure. But I've hiked every trail in this park, and something about Timber Creek has always felt, I don't know, different." Charlie knew me well enough not to dismiss my instincts, even when I couldn't articulate them clearly. We'd been working together for 6 years, and he'd seen those hunches pay off before. The road narrowed further as we approached the trailhead, the tall pines creating a tunnel effect around us. The afternoon was progressing, shadows growing longer across the forest floor. We had maybe 5 hours of good daylight left, not enough for a thorough search today, but enough to get started and establish a baseline for tomorrow. We pulled into the small clearing that served as a parking area for the eastern trail access. 3 other vehicles sat in the lot. A park maintenance truck, a red Subaru with a local hiking club sticker, and a blue Honda CR-V. "That's their car," Charlie said, pointing to the Honda. "Matches the plate number from the report." I parked beside it and we both got out. The Honda was covered in a light layer of dust, clearly having sat here for several days. I peered through the windows, nothing unusual visible inside, just a sweater thrown across the back seat and a couple of empty water bottles in the cup holders. "At least we know they started from here," I said, turning to survey the trailhead. The main path led west into dense forest, with a wooden sign marking the official trails and their distances. Beyond the sign, barely visible now in the lengthening shadows, was a smaller trail that broke north, the unauthorized route that would eventually lead to Timber Creek. Charlie had already shouldered his pack and was checking his GPS unit. "If we start now, we can make it about 3 miles in before we need to turn back." I nodded, securing my own pack. Let's see if they signed the trail register at least. The small wooden box that held the trail log was mounted near the main sign. Hikers were supposed to note their name, date, and intended route, another rule often ignored. I flipped through the most recent pages, and to my surprise, found an entry from 4 days ago. Chris and Sarah Rodriguez. Day hike to Little Eagle Lake, possibly camping one night if we find a good spot. They lied about their destination, I said, showing Charlie the entry. Little Eagle Lake is in the opposite direction from Timber Creek. Charlie frowned. So they deliberately misled anyone who might come looking for them. Which means they knew exactly what they were doing by heading to a restricted area. I closed the register and secured it back in its box. Let's get moving. We'll take the North Fork and see if we can find any sign of them before dark. We started down the main trail, our boots crunching on the gravel path. After about 10 minutes of hiking, we reached the junction where the smaller trail split northward. A red and white sign clearly stated, "No camping, dangerous terrain. Permit required for day hiking." I paused at the sign, studying the narrow path that disappeared into the denser forest beyond. This was the way to Timber Creek, and somewhere along that path, Chris and Sarah Rodriguez had vanished. "Ready?" Charlie asked, adjusting his pack straps. I nodded and we stepped off the main trail, heading into the shadows of the forest as afternoon began its slow transition toward evening. Charlie and I stepped onto the narrow path, leaving the main trail behind. The forest immediately felt different here, denser, the canopy overhead closing in to filter the afternoon sun into sparse, dappled patterns on the forest floor. The air felt cooler in the shadows, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. "We should stick to standard search protocols," I said, adjusting the radio clipped to my shoulder. "Call out every few minutes. Look for any signs of recent passage." Charlie nodded, already scanning the ground for footprints or other disturbances. Assuming they actually came this way and didn't head to Little Eagle Lake like they wrote in the register. My gut says they came here. Why lie about Little Eagle unless you're planning to go somewhere you shouldn't? We moved forward at a steady pace, our boots crunching softly on the mixture of pine needles and scattered gravel. The path was overgrown in places, clearly less traveled than the main trails. I checked my GPS unit periodically, confirming we were heading in the direction of Timber Creek. "Chris! Sarah!" Charlie called out, his voice carrying through the trees before being swallowed by the dense vegetation. We paused, listening for any response, but heard only the soft rustling of pine boughs in the light breeze. I took up the call next. "Chris and Sarah Rodriguez, park rangers, can you hear us?" Again, nothing but forest sounds answered back. We continued this pattern as we hiked deeper into the restricted area, calling out, listening, moving forward. The shadows lengthened as the afternoon wore on, and I found myself increasingly aware of how isolated this section of the park felt. Most areas, even remote ones, had a certain welcoming quality to them. This place felt different, almost reluctant to be traversed. 2 hours in, Charlie said, checking his watch. "If we don't find anything in the next hour, we should think about heading back before we lose too much daylight." I was about to agree when something caught my eye, a depression in the soft earth just off the path. I moved closer, crouching down to examine it. "We've got footprints," I said, waving Charlie over. "2 sets, heading east off the trail, recent too. The edges are still sharp." Charlie joined me, pulling out his small digital camera to document the prints before we followed them. "Size looks right," he said, comparing the prints to the information we had on the Rodriguez couple. "Man's boot, probably size 10 or 11. Woman's hiking boot, smaller print." The tracks led away from the established path, moving through an area where the underbrush grew thicker. As we followed, the signs of passage became more evident. Broken twigs, bent ferns, places where someone had pushed aside branches to make way. "They were definitely in a hurry," I noted, pointing to a snapped branch. "That takes force. They weren't being careful about leaving a trace." "Heading toward the creek, looks like," Charlie said, consulting his GPS. "Timber Creek should be about half a mile in this direction." We followed the trail of disturbance, calling out periodically but still receiving no response. After about 30 minutes of careful tracking, the forest began to thin slightly. Up ahead, I could make out a small clearing near what sounded like running water. We were approaching Timber Creek itself. "Look there," Charlie said quietly, pointing toward a cluster of large boulders at the edge of the clearing. Just visible behind the rocks was a corner of blue fabric, a tent partially hidden from view. We approached cautiously, continuing to call out as we drew closer. "Chris, Sarah, this is Park Ranger David Miller. We're here to help." The camp came into full view as we rounded the boulders, and I immediately felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The site looked as though the occupants had vanished in the middle of everyday activities. A blue 2-person tent was set up in a flat spot behind the cluster of boulders, its front flap unzipped and hanging open. 2 sleeping bags lay inside, one neatly arranged, the other rumpled as if someone had just gotten out of it. Outside, a small camp stove sat on a flat rock with a pot of water, and an open package of dehydrated food beside it. A circle of stones contained the ashes of a recent fire, still slightly warm when I held my hand near them. "They haven't been gone long," I said, noting the state of the campfire. "Maybe a few hours at most." Charlie had already pulled on a pair of latex gloves from his pack and begun a methodical inspection of the site, photographing everything before touching it. "Got a wallet here," he said, carefully picking up a brown leather billfold from near the fire pit. He opened it and checked the contents. "Belongs to Christopher Rodriguez. Driver's license, credit cards, about $60 in cash. All still here." I moved toward the tent, peering inside without entering. "There's a purse in here." Charlie joined me, taking photos of the tent interior before reaching in to retrieve the small bag. Inside was Sarah Rodriguez's identification, a compact mirror, lip balm, her phone, and her wallet containing several credit cards and cash. "So we can rule out robbery," Charlie said, returning the purse to its original position after documenting it. What troubled me most was what I spotted hanging from the tent's interior loop. A carabiner with several keys attached, including what was clearly a car key fob. "They're car keys," I said, pointing them out to Charlie. "They left everything behind: money, ID, transportation." Charlie photographed the keys in place, almost like they stepped away expecting to come right back. We continued our survey of the campsite. The couple's heavy jackets were still in the tent, along with extra clothing and a small first aid kit. Their backpacks rested against one of the boulders, containing additional supplies, food, and water purification tablets. "No hiking boots in the tent," Charlie noted, "and I don't see them around the campsite either." "So they were wearing their boots when they left," I said, "but didn't take their jackets, even though temperatures drop significantly at night up here." I unclipped the radio from my shoulder and called in to dispatch. "This is Ranger Miller. We've located the Rodriguez campsite near Timber Creek. The camp appears abandoned but intact. No sign of the couple, but all valuables and essential gear remain at the site." The radio crackled with Karen's response. "Copy that, Ranger Miller. Do you need additional personnel for a search operation?" I looked at Charlie, who nodded. "Affirmative. Request search team for first light tomorrow. We'll continue looking until dark, but we're losing daylight." "Copy. We'll organize team for 0600 hours tomorrow. Please provide coordinates for rendezvous." I read off our GPS coordinates and confirmed the transmission was received. As I clipped the radio back to my shoulder, Charlie had finished his initial documentation of the site. "I've got good photos of everything," he said. "Where do you want to start looking?" I surveyed the area around us, trying to think like the missing hikers. They left in their boots but without jackets or supplies. That suggests they weren't planning to go far. "Maybe they went to get water," Charlie suggested, gesturing toward the sound of the creek nearby. "Let's check it out," I agreed. "We've got about 2 hours of usable daylight left. We'll search the immediate area, then head back to their campsite and reassess." As we moved toward the creek, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong about this situation. Experienced hikers don't leave their campsite so completely, especially not without taking basic essentials. Whatever had drawn Chris and Sarah Rodriguez away from their camp, it hadn't given them time to prepare. And that worried me more than anything else we'd found so far. Charlie and I made our way from the campsite toward Timber Creek, following a well-worn path that suggested Chris and Sarah had traveled this route multiple times during their stay. The sound of rushing water grew louder as we approached, eventually bringing us to a small clearing where the creek tumbled over smooth rocks. The water ran clear and cold, about 15 feet across at its widest point. "No sign of them here," Charlie said, scanning the shoreline. I studied the area carefully, looking for any indication of recent activity. The ground near the water's edge showed footprints similar to those we'd tracked from the trail, likely Chris and Sarah collecting water for their camp. But nothing suggested distress or hurried movement. "Let's fan out a bit," I suggested. "You take upstream, I'll check downstream." We separated, staying within shouting distance as we searched along the creek banks. I moved slowly, keeping my eyes on the ground and surrounding vegetation for any signs of the missing couple. The light was fading faster now, shadows deepening beneath the tall pines. After about 10 minutes of methodical searching, I circled back toward the campsite, taking a slightly different path than we'd used to reach the creek. That's when something caught my eye. A small reflection among the pine needles about 20 feet from their tent. I approached carefully, crouching down to examine what appeared to be a digital camera partially buried under loose needles and forest debris. The black case was dirty but looked intact, though the lens cap was missing. I brushed away the needles, revealing a soil-covered display screen. "Charlie," I called. "Found something." He joined me quickly, his footsteps crunching on the forest floor. "A camera?" "Yeah," I confirmed, turning it over in my gloved hands. "Looks like it might still be working." Charlie knelt beside me, examining the device. "We should bag it and let the investigation team handle it tomorrow. Preserve the chain of evidence." I considered his suggestion, which aligned with standard protocol, but something felt wrong about waiting. If there's anything on here that could tell us where they went, we need to know now. The temperature drops fast up here after sunset. If they're injured somewhere... Charlie hesitated, weighing procedure against the urgency of the situation. "You're right. We can document that we viewed it in the field under emergency search conditions." He reached into his pack and pulled out a small tablet device. "I've got a card reader. We can transfer the files without handling the memory card too much." I carefully brushed more dirt from the camera and powered it on. The screen lit up, showing a low battery but otherwise functioning normally. Charlie connected it to his tablet using a cable from his kit, and we transferred the files. "Looks like about 50 photos and 1 video file," he said, opening the first image on his tablet. The photos told the story of a typical camping trip. The first set showed Chris and Sarah setting up their tent, both smiling as they worked together. Later images captured them cooking meals over the camp stove, sitting by their fire, and hiking along what appeared to be Timber Creek. They looked happy and relaxed, taking selfies with mountain views in the background. "Timestamps show these were taken over 3 days," Charlie noted, swiping through the images. "Last batch from yesterday evening." The final photos showed Sarah arranging wood for their fire as the daylight began to fade. They appeared completely normal. No signs of concern or anything unusual in the background. "What about the video?" I asked. Charlie tapped the video file and it began to play on his tablet. The quality was good, clearly showing Sarah kneeling beside their campfire, adding small sticks to build up the flames. Chris was filming from near their tent, about 10 feet away. The sky visible in the background showed dusk approaching, matching the time of the last photos. "That should catch," Sarah said on the video, sitting back on her heels as the fire began to take hold. "We can heat up dinner in about..." She stopped mid-sentence, her head turning sharply toward the tree line beyond their camp. For several seconds, she simply stared into the forest, her body perfectly still. The audio picked up a sound then, something I couldn't immediately identify. Not quite an animal call, but not human either. It was a series of low, rhythmic sounds that seemed to pulse through the forest. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, rising to her feet. "I don't know." Chris's voice came from behind the camera. "Maybe a coyote or someone else camping nearby." The sound came again, slightly louder, still unidentifiable, but clearly what had caught Sarah's attention. "Sarah," Chris whispered as she took a step toward the trees. "Come back to the fire." She didn't respond, instead taking another step toward the forest edge. The camera moved as Chris apparently stood up, following her. "Sarah, seriously." His voice was tense now. "Let's just stay by the fire." She kept walking, moving away from the safety of their camp and toward whatever was making those strange sounds. The video became shaky as Chris followed her, the camera bobbing with his movement. "Sarah, wait," he called, a note of fear entering his voice. The final seconds of footage showed Sarah approaching the tree line, her back to the camera as she moved with purpose toward the source of the sound. Then came a sudden jarring motion, a loud crash, and the screen went black. The video ended there. Charlie and I sat in silence for a moment, processing what we'd just witnessed. "Could be an animal attack," Charlie finally said. "Bear maybe, though they usually make more noise approaching a camp." I rewound the video to listen to the strange sounds again. That doesn't sound like any bear or mountain lion I've ever heard, and I don't think it's human either. "Whatever it was, Sarah was drawn to it," Charlie observed. "She wasn't running away. She was approaching it deliberately." I stood up, pocketing the camera. The sky had darkened considerably while we'd been reviewing the footage, and the temperature was already dropping. I pulled out my flashlight, switching it on. "We need to head in the direction she was walking," I said. "That's our best lead right now." Charlie nodded, stowing his tablet and retrieving his own flashlight. Based on the video, she was heading northeast from the camp. He pointed his light beam toward a section of trees about 50 yards away. "That way." As darkness settled over the forest, we began searching in the direction Sarah had walked in the video, our flashlights cutting through the growing shadows. The beam of my flashlight cut a thin path through the darkness as Charlie and I moved in the direction Sarah had been walking in the video. The forest had changed with nightfall, transforming from merely isolated to actively hostile. Shadows seemed to gather between the trees, and the temperature had dropped enough that I could see my breath forming pale clouds in the flashlight beam. "We should follow this bearing for about 100 yards, Charlie said, his voice lowered instinctively. "That matches the trajectory she was taking in the footage." I nodded, keeping my light trained on the ground. Within minutes, we found the first clear signs of passage. A snapped branch hanging at an odd angle, vegetation crushed underfoot, and disturbed pine needles showing someone had moved through here recently. "Look at this," I called to Charlie, crouching to examine what appeared to be scuff marks in the soft earth. Someone was moving quickly through here. Charlie joined me, directing his light alongside mine. "The soil's been kicked up, not just walking, running maybe." We continued forward, finding more evidence with each passing minute. The trail became easier to follow as we discovered broken twigs, displaced rocks, and clear footprints in patches of softer ground. Whatever had happened here, it had created a chaotic path through the underbrush. About 50 yards from the camp, Charlie's light caught something wedged between two rocks, just off the makeshift trail. "Dave," he said, his voice tight. "Over here." I moved to his side and felt my stomach knot. A woman's hiking boot was jammed between the rocks, its laces torn and frayed. Mud caked the sole, and one side showed deep scratches that had torn through the leather. "That's Sarah's," I said, recognizing it from the video footage we'd watched. "She was wearing these exact boots." Charlie photographed the boot in place before I carefully retrieved it, turning it over in my hands. The damage wasn't consistent with normal wear or even with someone desperately running through rough terrain. The laces hadn't simply come untied, they'd been violently torn. "This isn't right," I said, placing the boot in an evidence bag. "People don't just lose their footwear like this unless something's physically pulling them out of it." Charlie nodded grimly, already scanning the area beyond with his flashlight. "The trail continues over there." We pressed on, our lights revealing a path that became increasingly erratic. The signs no longer suggested someone walking or even running normally. The pattern showed stumbling, falling, and what appeared to be desperate scrambling. In one muddy patch, clear handprints indicated someone had crawled several feet before getting up again. I paused at this spot, shining my light in a wider arc around the area. That's when I noticed something else. Unusual markings pressed into the soft earth nearby. Deep gouges ran parallel to the human tracks, but they matched no animal print I'd seen in 15 years of backcountry work. "Charlie, what do you make of these?" I asked, directing my light toward the strange impressions. He crouched beside me, studying them carefully. Not bear. Not mountain lion. He reached out, hovering his hand over one impression without touching it. Too large for anything native to this region, and the pattern's all wrong. I took several photos with my digital camera, making sure to include a scale marker from my pack. The impressions were nearly twice the size of a large grizzly track, but had an elongated shape with what appeared to be claw marks extending several inches beyond the main print. "Let's keep moving," I said, standing up. "We're losing time." We followed the chaotic trail for another 100 yards, the elevation gradually increasing as we moved away from the campsite. The vegetation thinned slightly as we approached what appeared to be a rocky outcropping. Our flashlight beams revealed a sudden drop just ahead, a steep ravine cutting through the landscape. Charlie and I stopped at the edge, sweeping our lights down into the darkness below. The canyon wasn't particularly wide, perhaps 30 feet across, but it dropped at least 40 feet to a rocky stream bed below. "There," Charlie said, his light catching something about halfway down the ravine wall. Disturbed vegetation clung to the steep slope, and several larger rocks showed dark stains that reflected our flashlight beams. I directed my light to the spot. "That looks like blood." We needed a closer look. Without discussing it, we both began unpacking our climbing gear. Standard search protocol would have us mark the location and wait for a full team, but both of us recognized that if the Rodriguez couple was injured, they might not survive the night in these temperatures. "I'll go first," I said, securing my harness and checking the anchor points along the sturdy trees near the edge. "Keep your radio channel open." Charlie nodded, helping me set up the rappel line while maintaining his own safety tether. "Watch for loose rocks. That whole face looks unstable." I backed toward the edge, testing the line with my weight before committing to the descent. The beam of my headlamp illuminated the path ahead as I began rappelling down the ravine wall, loose soil and small stones cascading down with each step. The descent took only minutes. As I neared the spot where we'd seen the stains, I called up to Charlie. "I'm at the site. There's definitely blood here, not a large amount, but it's fresh." I continued down to the canyon floor, landing on the rocky stream bed beside a shallow flow of water. Charlie followed, and soon we were both examining the base of the ravine with our lights. "Over there," Charlie said, pointing his beam toward a jagged rock outcropping about 20 feet upstream. Something colorful was caught on the rocks, fabric fluttering slightly in the gentle night breeze. We made our way carefully over the uneven ground, and my heart sank as we got closer. It was a jacket. A woman's lightweight hiking jacket in teal blue, the same one Sarah had been wearing in the video. I approached it carefully, photographing its position before touching anything. The jacket was snagged on a sharp protrusion of rock, hanging about 3 feet above the stream bed. The fabric was torn in multiple places, with long parallel rips running down the back and across one sleeve. Dark stains marked the material. Some were clearly mud, but others had the unmistakable rusty color of dried blood. "This isn't from a fall," Charlie said quietly, examining the tears more closely with his light. "These are claw marks." He was right. The parallel tears were evenly spaced and cut cleanly through the durable material in a way that rocks or branches couldn't manage. Something with substantial claws had shredded the jacket, and possibly its wearer. I bagged the jacket carefully, marking it as evidence. As Charlie continued examining the immediate area, I swept my light across the canyon walls, looking for any sign of where Sarah might have gone from here. That's when I noticed the trees. 3 large pines growing near the water's edge bore massive gouges in their trunks, cutting deep into the wood at about 7 feet above the ground. The marks weren't random. They appeared deliberate, almost like territorial markings. I approached the nearest tree, running my gloved fingers over the exposed inner wood where something had carved away the bark and at least an inch of the trunk beneath. "Charlie," I called, "take a look at this." He joined me, his expression growing more concerned as he examined the tree markings. Bear marks usually stop at the bark, and they're normally much lower to the ground. Mountain lions occasionally claw trees, but nothing like this. Whatever made these was big, I said. Much bigger than anything that should be in these woods. I stepped back, sweeping my light across all 3 marked trees. The gouges formed a rough triangle around this section of the stream bed, like something was marking its territory, or its hunting ground. A sudden sound from above made us both freeze. Something was moving on the ridge where we descended, heavy footsteps displacing rocks that clattered down into the canyon. Charlie and I instinctively killed our lights, standing motionless in the darkness. "We need to get back up there," I whispered, already moving toward our climbing ropes. We ascended quickly, years of training taking over as we pulled ourselves up the ravine wall with efficient, urgent movements. The sounds above had stopped, but that didn't ease the tension building in my chest. Something felt wrong about this entire situation, wrong in ways that went beyond a simple hiking accident or animal encounter. As we neared the top of the ravine, I heard Charlie's breathing quicken. "Dave," he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Something's up there." I paused my climb, listening intently. The forest had gone completely silent. No night birds, no insects, nothing but the soft hiss of wind through pine needles. It was the kind of silence that meant predators were nearby. Large predators. We resumed climbing, moving as quietly as possible while maintaining our pace. When we reached the edge, I cautiously raised my head above the rim, scanning the darkened forest beyond. Nothing moved in the shadows, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Charlie pulled himself up beside me, and we quickly gathered our ropes, securing our gear without speaking. Only when we were ready to move did I risk turning my flashlight back on, keeping the beam pointed downward to minimize our visibility. "We should continue searching," I said quietly, "but stay close and keep your sidearm ready." Charlie nodded, his hand moving to the holster at his hip. Standard procedure discouraged using firearms except in life-threatening situations, but something about those claw marks suggested we might be dealing with exactly that kind of threat. We gathered our ropes in tense silence, the feeling of being watched pressing down on us like a physical weight. Charlie and I worked quickly, our movements efficient but careful, minimizing noise as we secured our gear. The forest around us remained unnaturally quiet, that deep, predator-induced silence that makes your skin crawl. I kept my light pointed at the ground, not wanting to announce our position more than necessary. "We should head back toward the main trail," I whispered to Charlie. "Whatever made those marks might still be nearby." Charlie nodded, his hand resting on his holster. We started moving away from the ravine edge, picking our way carefully through the underbrush to avoid snapping branches or dislodging rocks. Every few steps, I would pause and listen, trying to detect any sounds of movement in the darkness around us. We'd gone about 20 yards when Charlie suddenly grabbed my arm. He tilted his head, signaling for me to listen. At first, I heard nothing beyond the soft whisper of wind through the pines. Then it came, a distant human voice cutting through the night. "Help! Somebody help me!" The call was weak but clear, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest to our north. Charlie and I exchanged glances. "That's got to be one of them," I said, already changing direction toward the sound. "Radio dispatch," Charlie suggested, moving alongside me. "Let them know we might have found a survivor." I pulled out my radio while we continued walking. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Miller. We're tracking what sounds like a survivor calling for help, approximately 1 mile northeast of the Rodriguez campsite. We're moving to investigate." "Copy that, Ranger Miller." Karen's voice crackled back. "Do you need additional support?" "Not yet," I replied, ducking under a low-hanging branch. "We'll update once we make contact. Be advised we've found evidence of predator activity in the area. Large predator." "Understood. Standing by for your update." The voice called out again, sounding desperate. Please, is anyone there? Help! This way, Charlie said, adjusting our course slightly. Sounds like it's coming from beyond that pine grove. We picked up our pace, pushing through denser vegetation as we moved away from the ravine area. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing tangles of underbrush and tightly packed tree trunks. The forest floor was uneven, forcing us to watch our footing while also staying alert for any signs of danger. "Hello?" I called out. "Park rangers? Keep calling so we can find you." "Here, I'm up here." The voice responded immediately, clearer now. "Please hurry." We followed the sound through a particularly thick stand of pines, emerging into a small clearing dominated by a massive Douglas fir. My light beam swung upward, tracking along the trunk until it caught a flash of movement about 15 feet above the ground. A man was clinging to the branches, his arms wrapped tightly around the trunk. Even from below, I could see dark stains on his clothes and skin that looked like blood. "Chris Rodriguez?" I called up. "Yes!" His voice cracked with emotion. "Please get me down. Is it gone? Did you see it?" "We haven't seen anything," Charlie assured him, already dropping his pack to retrieve our portable ladder. "We're going to get you down safely." I kept my flashlight trained on Chris while Charlie assembled the ladder. The beam illuminated his terrified face and the numerous scratches visible on his arms and cheeks. His clothing was torn in multiple places, and he was shivering violently despite the physical exertion of holding himself in the tree. "Chris, I'm Ranger Dave Miller, and this is Ranger Charlie Wilson," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "We're here to help you. Are you injured?" "It got Sarah," he said, his voice breaking. "It took her. We need to go. We can't stay here." "We're going to get you down first," I said. "Then we'll get you to safety." Charlie positioned the ladder against the trunk, securing it as best he could on the uneven ground. "It's ready," he told me. "Chris," I called up, "we've got a ladder set up for you. I need you to very carefully let go of the trunk and find the top rung with your foot. Can you do that?" He nodded jerkily but didn't move. "Take your time," I encouraged him. "We're right here. We won't let you fall." He finally loosened his grip on the trunk, his movements stiff and pained as if he'd been in the same position for hours. Slowly, he maneuvered one foot onto the ladder, testing it with his weight. "That's it," I said. "Now the other foot. We've got you." Charlie steadied the ladder while I stood close by, ready to catch Chris if he slipped. His descent was slow and awkward, his limbs clearly numbed from cold and fear. When he reached the bottom rung, his legs gave out, and I caught him before he could collapse entirely. The moment his feet touched the ground, he broke down. His body shook with violent sobs as he clung to my jacket. "It killed her," he repeated between gasps. "It killed Sarah. We have to go. Please, we have to go." I supported his weight while Charlie quickly packed up the ladder. "We're going to get you out of here," I promised, guiding him to sit on a fallen log. "But I need to look at your injuries first." His face and arms were covered in scratches, some deep enough to need stitches. A particularly nasty gash ran across his forehead, and dried blood matted his hair on one side. I pulled out my first aid kit and began cleaning the worst of the wounds. "Charlie, radio dispatch," I said. "We need medical evacuation as soon as possible." Charlie nodded and stepped away to make the call while I continued tending to Chris's injuries. "Can you tell me what happened?" I asked gently, applying antiseptic to a deep scratch on his forearm. Chris's breathing was still erratic, but he made an effort to calm himself. "We were at our campsite. Sarah heard something in the woods, some kind of sound we couldn't identify. She wanted to check it out. This matched what we'd seen in the video footage." I nodded encouragingly as I wrapped a bandage around his arm. "I followed her with the camera," he continued. "She kept walking toward the trees. I told her to come back, but she wouldn't listen. It was like she was drawn to it." He paused, his eyes unfocused as he relived the memory. "Then what happened?" I prompted softly. I tripped over a root and dropped the camera. When I looked up, this thing came out of the darkness. His voice dropped to a whisper. It was huge, bigger than any bear I've ever seen, but it didn't move like a bear. It moved like it knew exactly what it was doing. Charlie returned, having completed the radio call. Medical team is assembling. They'll meet us at the main trail junction as soon as possible. I nodded and turned back to Chris. What happened after you saw the creature? Chris swallowed hard. It went straight for Sarah, not charging like a normal attack, more like it was hunting her specifically. She screamed and tried to run, but it caught her in seconds. His voice broke again. I ran toward them, yelling, trying to distract it. The thing turned and came at me instead. He pulled up his torn pant leg, revealing deep, parallel gashes on his calf. It swiped at me once before I could get away. I ran as hard as I could, but it was right behind me. The only reason I'm alive is because I made it to this tree. How long were you up there? Charlie asked. Hours, Chris said. It stayed below, circling, watching. It could have climbed up if it wanted to. I was sure it would. But it just waited, like it was playing with me. Then maybe an hour ago, it finally left. I finished bandaging the worst of his wounds and helped him to his feet. We need to move. Can you walk? He nodded weakly. Just get me out of here. Charlie took point while I supported Chris, who leaned heavily against me as we began making our way toward the main trail. Every few minutes, Chris would freeze, thinking he heard something in the forest around us. What exactly did this creature look like? I asked, partly to keep him talking and partly because we needed to know what we were potentially dealing with. Chris shook his head slightly. It was dark, but I could see enough. It was massive, way bigger than a grizzly. Its fur was patchy in places like it was diseased, and its movements... He shuddered. Animals don't move like that. It was calculating, watching, waiting. Did it make any sounds? Charlie asked from ahead of us. A kind of low, rhythmic noise. Not a growl exactly. More like... He struggled to find the words. Like something between a pulse and a call. That's what Sarah heard first. That's what drew her toward it. We continued moving through the forest, our progress slow but steady. Chris grew more lucid as we walked, the shock wearing off enough for him to provide clearer details. It dragged her toward the ravine, he said, his voice hollow. I heard her screaming for so long, even after I couldn't see them anymore. Then the screaming just stopped. This matched what we'd found. The trail leading to the canyon where we discovered Sarah's jacket. I didn't tell Chris about finding it yet. That conversation could wait until he received medical attention. You did everything you could, I told him quietly. He shook his head. I should have stopped her from walking into those trees. I knew something was wrong. We walked in silence for several minutes, the only sounds our footsteps on the forest floor, and Chris's occasional sharp intake of breath when his injuries pained him. I've been hiking these mountains for years, he finally said. I've seen bears, mountain lions, wolves. I know what lives out here, but this wasn't like anything natural. The way it watched me in that tree. It was almost like it was thinking, planning. Charlie glanced back at us, his expression troubled. We'll have wildlife experts investigate, he assured Chris. Whatever it was, we'll find it. Chris laughed bitterly. Good luck. That thing. It's smart. Smarter than any animal should be. We continued through the darkness, each lost in our own thoughts. I kept replaying the evidence we'd found. The claw marks on the trees, the strange tracks, Sarah's shredded jacket. Nothing matched any predator behavior I'd encountered in 15 years of ranger work. As we neared the junction where the medical team would meet us, Chris stopped suddenly, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "You have to believe me," he said, his eyes wide and desperate. "This wasn't just some bear or mountain lion. There's something wrong with it. Something unnatural. You can't let anyone else go near that area." "I believe you," I told him, and I meant it. The evidence we'd found corroborated his account too well to dismiss it. "We'll make sure no one else gets hurt." Chris seemed to accept this, sagging against me as the last of his adrenaline drained away. We continued walking, the main trail finally visible ahead through the trees. In the distance, I could see flashlights moving our way, the medical team coming to meet us. Charlie radioed ahead to confirm our position and Chris's condition. As the lights drew closer, Chris spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I keep thinking about how it watched me, for hours, just staring up at me in that tree. A violent shiver ran through him, like it was learning about me, like it wanted me to be afraid before it killed me. We met the medical team at the trail junction, where they immediately went to work on Chris's more serious injuries. 2 EMTs guided him onto a stretcher despite his weak protests that he could walk. His adrenaline had finally worn off, and the full extent of his injuries became apparent under the harsh portable lights. The gashes on his leg looked worse than I'd initially thought. Deep parallel cuts that had barely missed major arteries. "We need to get him to the hospital," the lead EMT told me after their initial assessment. "Some of these wounds need proper cleaning and stitches. He's also showing signs of exposure and shock." I nodded, watching as they wrapped thermal blankets around Chris's shivering form. "Charlie and I will accompany you back to the access road." "What about Sarah?" Chris asked weakly as they secured him to the stretcher. "We can't leave her out there." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll organize a recovery team for First Light. Right now, we need to get you proper medical attention." The journey back to the access road took nearly an hour, following the main trail with the stretcher. Chris drifted in and out of lucidity, sometimes mumbling about Sarah and other times describing the creature in broken sentences. Each time he mentioned it, the details remained consistent: enormous size, patchy fur, and movements that seemed calculated rather than instinctual. It wasn't hunting like a normal predator, he told me during one of his more coherent moments. It herded us, like it knew exactly what it was doing. Charlie walked ahead with one of the EMTs, clearing the path of any obstacles. I stayed beside Chris, both to monitor his condition and to hear anything else he might remember. "When it first appeared," Chris continued, his voice barely audible over the sound of our footsteps on the trail, "it didn't go straight for us. It circled around, cutting off our path back to camp. Sarah tried to run the other way, but it was like it anticipated that." "Did you recognize what kind of animal it was?" I asked. Chris shook his head slightly. "It moved on 4 legs, but sometimes it seemed to rear up. The proportions were all wrong, too tall, too thin in places. And its face..." He trailed off, his eyes unfocused. "I've never seen anything like it." When we reached the access road, an ambulance was waiting. The EMTs loaded Chris inside while Charlie and I spoke with the driver. "Take him to Memorial in Riverbrook," I instructed. "We'll follow right behind you. The sheriff's department will need a statement when he's stable enough." I radioed dispatch as we drove back toward the ranger station, updating them on Chris's condition and officially reporting Sarah as a probable fatality. Karen's voice was tight with concern as she acknowledged the information and confirmed she would contact the sheriff's department immediately. The drive back was mostly silent. Charlie stared out the window into the darkness, his normally composed features drawn with tension. "What do you make of his description?" I finally asked. Charlie took a moment before answering. "Nothing matches. Not a bear, not a cat, not a wolf. Nothing native to these mountains fits what he described or the evidence we found. The claw marks on those trees were 7 feet up," I reminded him. "Whatever made them was huge. And the spacing was all wrong," Charlie added. "Too wide for even the largest grizzly." We arrived at the ranger station just after 11. Sheriff Robert Hayes was already waiting, his department SUV parked out front with the lights still flashing. He stood as we pulled in, a tall figure with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in law enforcement in mountain country. "Miller," he greeted me with a firm handshake. "Wilson, Karen filled me in on the basics. Sounds like we've got a situation." I nodded grimly. Chris Rodriguez is on his way to Memorial. His wife Sarah is still missing, but based on the evidence in his account, we're treating this as a probable fatality. Hayes' expression darkened. "And the animal?" "Unknown," Charlie answered. "But dangerous. Definitely not typical predator behavior." We headed inside, where I pulled up the digital files from the camera we'd found. Hayes watched intently as we played the video footage showing Sarah walking toward the tree line. "And this is right before the attack?" he asked. "Yes. Chris says he dropped the camera when he tripped, right after this cuts off." Hayes leaned closer to the screen, listening to the strange sounds that had drawn Sarah's attention. "Never heard anything like that." "Neither have we," Charlie said. "Chris claims the creature makes those sounds deliberately, almost like a lure." I pulled out the topographical maps of the Timber Creek area and spread them across the table. "We found Sarah's jacket here," I said, pointing to the ravine, "and Chris was hiding in a tree about half a mile northeast of that location." Hayes studied the map. Rough country, lots of places to hide. "Based on what we found in Chris's account, I'd estimate the creature's territory covers at least this 5-mile radius." I traced a circle on the map, centered roughly on the upper portion of Timber Creek. "We need to close that entire section," Hayes said immediately. "No hikers, no campers, nothing until we figure out what we're dealing with." Charlie had moved to a computer terminal and was pulling up incident reports from the past month. "I'm checking if there have been any other unusual sightings or encounters." While Hayes continued examining the maps, I joined Charlie at the computer. He had pulled up several reports flagged for unusual animal activity. "3 separate incidents," he said, pointing to the screen, "all within the last month, all in the same general area as the Rodriguez attack." I leaned closer to read the details. The first report was from a solo hiker who claimed something large had stalked him for nearly 2 miles along the Eastern Ridge Trail. He never got a clear look at it, but described hearing unusual vocalizations that didn't match any known wildlife. The second report came from a couple who abandoned their campsite in the middle of the night after hearing something circling their tent for hours. They reported finding large tracks the next morning, but couldn't identify what animal had made them. The third incident involved a group of college students who were day hiking near Little Eagle Lake. They reported seeing what they initially thought was a bear moving through the trees ahead of them, but noted its movement patterns and size seemed abnormal. They immediately turned back and reported the sighting when they returned to the trailhead. All 3 incidents were within 5 miles of today's attack, Charlie said, pulling up a digital map and marking each location, and all described similar behaviors: stalking, unusual sounds, and deliberate movement patterns. Hayes joined us, studying the screen with a frown. Why wasn't this pattern flagged earlier? Each report was filed individually with different rangers, I explained. The first 2 were classified as probable bear encounters. The third was logged, but not elevated since there was no direct threat or contact. The hospital called while we were reviewing the reports. Chris had been stabilized and treated for his injuries, which included multiple deep lacerations, mild hypothermia, and shock. The doctor cleared him for a brief interview, so Hayes prepared to head to the hospital. "I want to come with you," I said. "I need to hear his full account now that he's more stable." Hayes nodded. "Wilson, can you stay here and coordinate with dispatch? We need to get notices out about the area closure and start assembling a recovery team for morning." Charlie agreed, already reaching for the phone. "I'll have everything ready by the time you get back." On the drive to the hospital, Hayes and I discussed the logistics of the next day's search. "We should assemble at the eastern access point at 6, he said. "I can bring 4 deputies. and the volunteer search and rescue team has already been alerted. The terrain where we found Sarah's jacket is rough, I warned him, and based on the evidence, there's a good chance her body may have been moved or partially consumed. Hayes's expression remained professionally neutral, but his knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I've seen animal attacks before, Miller. We'll handle it. This is different, I said quietly. The pattern doesn't fit anything I've encountered in 15 years of ranger work. The way it hunted them, the territorial markings, the calculated movements. You think it's some kind of non-native predator? Maybe something escaped from a private collection? I considered this. Possibly. But whatever it is, it seems to have established territory and hunting patterns. That suggests it's been in these mountains for some time. At the hospital, we found Chris in a private room, his visible skin covered in bandages and an IV drip running into his arm. His eyes were clearer now, the initial shock having subsided into a hollow grief that seemed to age him a decade. Hayes introduced himself and explained that he needed a formal statement about what had happened to Sarah. Chris nodded, his voice steadier than it had been in the forest. We'd been camping for 3 days, he began. Everything was normal until that last evening. We were sitting by our fire when Sarah heard something in the trees, a sound we couldn't identify. He described following her with the camera, how she seemed drawn to whatever was making the noise. His account matched exactly what we'd seen in the video footage. After I dropped the camera, I saw it come out of the darkness, he continued. At first I thought it was a bear, but something was wrong about the way it moved. Too deliberate, too aware. Can you describe its appearance in detail? Hayes asked, taking notes. Chris closed his eyes, visibly struggling with the memory. Large, bigger than any bear I've seen. Dark fur, but patchy in places like it had some kind of skin condition. Its proportions were wrong. Longer limbs than a bear should have, and the way it moved. He shook his head. Sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes almost upright. What about its face? I prompted, remembering how he'd trailed off when mentioning it earlier. Chris opened his eyes, his gaze distant, distorted. The jaw seemed too long, and its eyes. He swallowed hard. They didn't look like animal eyes. There was something almost human in the way it watched us, like it understood exactly what it was doing. Hayes continued taking notes. And it attacked Sarah first? Yes, it went straight for her. I ran toward them, yelling, trying to distract it. That's when it turned on me. Chris lifted his bandaged arm. I ran as fast as I could. I could hear Sarah screaming behind me, but I couldn't help her. His voice broke, and he took a moment to compose himself before continuing. It chased me through the forest. I found that tree and climbed as high as I could. The thing circled below, watching me for hours, just waiting, like it knew I couldn't stay up there forever. But eventually it left? Hayes asked. Chris nodded. After dark. I don't know why. Maybe it went back for Sarah, or maybe it found easier prey. I was too afraid to climb down until I heard you calling. Hayes finished taking his statement and excused himself to make a call, leaving me alone with Chris. We're going to find Sarah tomorrow, I told him quietly. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. You won't find her alive. I know. I'm sorry. Chris turned his gaze to the window where the night pressed black against the glass. That thing, it's still out there. And it's not just some animal, it's something worse. We're closing that entire section of the park, I assured him. No one else will be at risk while we hunt it down. Be careful, he said, turning back to me. It's smart. Smarter than anything out there should be. When Hayes and I left the hospital, it was past midnight. The sheriff was quiet as we drove back to the ranger station, processing everything we'd learned. I've dealt with problem bears, mountain lions, even the occasional wolf, he finally said, but this doesn't fit any pattern I recognize. That's what worries me, I admitted. We're dealing with something outside normal predator behavior. Back at the station, Charlie had completed the arrangements for the next day's search. He'd coordinated with dispatch to issue an emergency closure of the Timber Creek area and organized equipment for the recovery team. I spread the topographical maps out again, studying the terrain more carefully. Based on where we'd found Chris and the location of Sarah's jacket, I tried to map the creature's likely movement patterns. If it follows typical predator behavior at all, it would establish a den somewhere within its territory, I said, tracing potential routes with my finger. Probably elevated, with good visibility and multiple escape routes. Charlie pointed to several promising locations on the map. These ridges would provide that kind of advantage, and there are old mining caves in this section that could serve as a den. Hayes joined us at the table. We'll split into 3 teams tomorrow, one to recover Sarah's body, one to secure the perimeter of the affected area, and one to track this thing to its den if possible. I want to bring in wildlife experts, I said. Whatever this is, we need specialized knowledge to deal with it. Hayes nodded. I'll contact the state wildlife department first thing in the morning. They can dispatch someone to assist with identification and tracking. As our planning session wrapped up, Charlie showed me one last piece of information he'd discovered. A report from nearly a year ago described unusual animal remains found near the northern boundary of our jurisdiction. A deer carcass that had been killed and partially consumed in a manner inconsistent with known predators. The report was filed but never investigated further, Charlie explained. It was assumed to be coyotes or possibly feral dogs. I studied the location on our map, noting that it fell just within the circle Charlie had drawn connecting the recent incidents. This thing has been here longer than we thought, I said quietly. Establishing territory, learning the area, maybe even observing human behavior. That's what makes it so dangerous, Charlie replied. Whatever it is, it's not just passing through. It's hunting here deliberately. Hayes left shortly after, heading home for a few hours of sleep before the recovery operation. Charlie and I remained at the station, preparing equipment and reviewing maps until exhaustion finally caught up with us. We took turns napping in the break room chairs, neither of us willing to leave the station with so much preparation still needed for morning. As I tried to sleep during my shift, my mind kept returning to the claw marks we'd found on those trees, 7 feet up, deliberate and methodical. And to Chris's description of the creature watching him, waiting with an intelligence no wild animal should possess. Whatever was hunting in our mountains, I had the unsettling feeling we were only beginning to understand its capabilities. I woke to Charlie gently shaking my shoulder. Gray light filtered through the blinds of the break room window. It's 5:30, he said, holding out a steaming mug of coffee. Team's assembling in 15 minutes. I straightened in the uncomfortable chair, wincing at the stiffness in my neck from the awkward sleeping position. The 3 hours of restless sleep had done little to refresh me, but the coffee helped bring my thoughts into focus. As I took a long sip, the previous day's events came rushing back, finding the abandoned campsite, discovering the video, rescuing Chris from the tree, and the disturbing evidence of whatever had attacked them. Hayes called. Charlie continued, gathering his gear. He's bringing 4 deputies and the county medical examiner. Search and rescue volunteers are meeting us at the trailhead. I drained half the mug and stood, stretching my sore muscles. Let me wash up and grab some food. I'll meet you out front. In the small bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my ranger uniform was wrinkled from sleeping in it. I did my best to make myself presentable, knowing that appearances mattered when leading a team into a potentially dangerous situation. The station's kitchen offered little beyond granola bars and instant oatmeal. I wolfed down 2 bars while checking my equipment. Fresh batteries in my flashlight, full water bottles, first aid supplies, and my sidearm securely holstered. I rarely needed my gun in the field, but after what we'd seen yesterday, I wasn't taking chances. Charlie was waiting by our truck, loading the last of our gear. The eastern sky had lightened to a pale blue, though the sun remained hidden behind the mountains. The air felt crisp and clean, belying the grim task ahead of us. "I called Dr. Novak while you were sleeping," Charlie said as we drove toward the trailhead. "He's the state's wildlife pathologist. I sent him the photos of the tracks and claw marks. He's interested in what we found, but wouldn't commit to any theories over the phone." "Did you mention Chris's description of the creature?" Charlie nodded. "He said behavioral anomalies in predators can sometimes result from disease or neurological conditions, but he wants to see the evidence himself before drawing conclusions." "Is he coming out?" "Not today. He's coordinating with the state wildlife department to send a field team. Probably won't get here until tomorrow at the earliest." We reached the eastern access point just before 6. Sheriff Hayes was already there with his team, standing beside a line of vehicles, including the county medical examiner's van. Hayes wore tactical gear rather than his usual uniform, a reminder that this wasn't a standard recovery operation. "Miller," he greeted me with a nod. "Wilson. Got a full team assembled and ready to move out." I surveyed the gathered personnel, Hayes' 4 deputies, the medical examiner and his assistant, and 6 volunteer search and rescue members, all experienced outdoors people equipped for difficult terrain. Hayes outlined the plan, pointing to locations on a map spread across his vehicle's hood. "We'll proceed to the Rodriguez campsite first, then split into 2 teams. Team 1 will follow Miller to the ravine where Sarah's jacket was found to begin our primary search. Team 2 will establish a perimeter and sweep the surrounding area for additional evidence." The medical examiner, Dr. Lewis, a slender man with salt and pepper hair and glasses, asked, "What exactly are we looking for, beyond the obvious?" "Ranger Miller can fill you in on the details," Hayes said, nodding to me. I described what we'd found the previous night: the ravine with blood evidence, the damaged jacket, and the unusual claw marks on the trees. I kept my voice steady and factual, but I could see the growing concern on the faces around me. "Based on the evidence and the survivor's account, we believe we're dealing with an unusually large predator showing atypical behavior patterns," I concluded. "It's aggressive, territorial, and potentially still in the area. Everyone should remain alert and stay with your assigned teams at all times." One of the search and rescue volunteers raised his hand. "Any idea what kind of animal we're dealing with? Bear? Mountain lion?" I exchanged a glance with Charlie before answering. "We're not certain. The tracks and marks don't match typical patterns for native wildlife. That's why we've requested state wildlife experts." Hayes added, "Everyone carries bear spray and maintains radio contact at all times. Deputies will be armed. Let's move out." We headed up the trail in a tight group, moving at a steady pace. The morning air was still cool, but I knew it would warm quickly once the sun cleared the mountain ridges. Birds called from the trees around us, their ordinary songs creating a discordant backdrop to our grim mission. The hike to the Rodriguez campsite took less than an hour, with our larger group following the clear trail Charlie and I had established the previous day. The campsite remained untouched since we'd left it, the blue tent still open, the scattered supplies exactly where we'd documented them. Hayes directed his deputies to establish a base camp here while the rest of us continued toward the ravine. Charlie led the way, following our previous path through the underbrush and pointing out the signs we'd discovered. "The video showed Sarah walking in this direction," he explained to the group. "Based on the evidence, we believe she was attacked somewhere between here and the ravine where we found her jacket." As we approached the ravine, I called a halt and pointed out the disturbed vegetation and blood-stained rocks we'd discovered the night before. In daylight, the scene revealed more details: drag marks through the underbrush, broken branches with dark stains, and more of those unusual gouges on surrounding trees. Dr. Lewis crouched to examine one of the bloodstains, taking samples and sealing them in evidence bags. "Substantial blood loss," he noted clinically, "consistent with major trauma." Hayes organized our search pattern, splitting us into pairs to cover the ravine floor systematically. Charlie and I would follow the stream bed downstream from where we'd found the jacket, while other teams would search upstream and along both sides of the ravine. Radio check every 15 minutes, Hayes instructed. And remember, this isn't just a recovery operation. We're also gathering evidence about whatever did this. Charlie and I made our way down to the canyon floor using the same rope system as the previous night. The ravine looked different in daylight, less forbidding but somehow more revealing in its stark details. The stream bed was narrow, flowing between mossy rocks and fallen branches. In places, the water ran red-brown with disturbed sediment. We moved carefully downstream, scanning both the water and the sloping banks. Every few yards, Charlie photographed anything unusual, more blood spots, disturbed earth, or vegetation that appeared to have been flattened by something heavy passing through. About a quarter-mile from where we'd found the jacket, the ravine widened slightly, creating a small clearing beside the stream. Charlie stopped abruptly, raising his hand in a silent signal. I followed his gaze to a dark shape partially hidden beneath a fallen log near the water's edge. "Sheriff," I called into my radio, keeping my voice steady. "We found something, approximately 400 yards downstream from the jacket location." "Copy that," Hayes responded. "Stay put. We're coming to you." Charlie and I approached slowly, already knowing what we would find. The body lay face down, partially submerged in the shallow water. Sarah Rodriguez's dark hair spread across the water's surface, moving gently with the current. She wore the same hiking clothes visible in the photos and video, now torn and stained dark with dried blood. I heard voices and footsteps as Hayes and Dr. Lewis made their way down to our position. I stepped back to give them room, my throat tight with a mixture of sadness and anger. This was far from my first recovery operation, but something about this scene felt profoundly wrong beyond the obvious tragedy. Dr. Lewis approached the body professionally, setting down his equipment and pulling on latex gloves. "I'll need to document everything before we move her," he told Hayes, who nodded grimly. While they worked, Charlie nudged my arm and pointed to the surrounding area. "Look at the trees." I followed his gaze and felt a chill despite the morning warmth. Every tree surrounding the small clearing bore deep gouges in their trunks, not random claw marks, but deliberate patterns carved approximately 7 feet above the ground. The marks formed a rough circle around the area where Sarah's body lay. "It's marking territory," I said quietly. "This is a deliberate kill site." Charlie nodded, already photographing the marks. "These are fresh. See how the sap is still wet? Some of these were made after we left last night." The implication sent another chill through me. The creature had returned to this site after we'd been here. Hayes joined us after speaking with Dr. Lewis. "What have you found?" he asked, noting our concerned expressions. I pointed out the territorial markings, explaining their significance. Normal predators don't do this, not with this level of deliberation. They might mark trees, but not in organized patterns around a kill site. Hayes studied the marks, his face grim, almost like it's claiming the area or warning others away. "Exactly," I agreed, and based on the freshness of some of these marks, it came back here after we left last night. This information visibly troubled Hayes. He keyed his radio, instructing his deputies to maintain heightened awareness and report any unusual sights or sounds immediately. Dr. Lewis called us over as he continued his initial examination of Sarah's body. I steeled myself before approaching, knowing this would be difficult to witness. "I'll conduct a full examination at the facility," he said, "but I can tell you this isn't a typical predator attack." "How so?" Hayes asked. Dr. Lewis pointed to several wounds visible on Sarah's body. In normal predator attacks, bears, mountain lions, there's a pattern to the injuries. They attack to kill quickly, then feed. These injuries, he hesitated, show a different pattern. Multiple wounds to non-lethal areas first, then finally killing wounds to the throat and torso. It was torturing her, Charlie said quietly. Dr. Lewis didn't use that word, but nodded slightly. The attack was prolonged and methodical. And look at this. He carefully moved Sarah's arm to reveal deep parallel gashes along her forearm. Defensive wounds. She was fighting back for some time before the fatal injuries occurred. I turned away, needing a moment to process this information. The image of Sarah in the video, walking curiously toward the forest edge, contrasted brutally with her body lying broken and torn before us. Whatever had done this hadn't just killed her. It had hunted her deliberately, prolonging her suffering. While Dr. Lewis and his assistant prepared Sarah's body for transport, I walked a short distance upstream, scanning the banks for additional evidence. About 30 yards away, I spotted something unusual. A patch of mud near the water's edge with clear impressions pressed into it. "Charlie," I called, "I've got tracks." Charlie joined me, camera ready. The tracks were enormous, paw prints nearly twice the size of a large grizzly, but with an elongated shape unlike any bear print I'd seen in 15 years of ranger work. The claw marks extended several inches beyond the main pad impression, deep and widely spaced. "These are fresh," Charlie said, placing a ruler beside one print for scale in his photographs. "Probably from last night or early this morning." Hayes and one of his deputies came to examine the tracks. The deputy, a former wildlife management officer, shook his head in disbelief. "I've tracked every predator in these mountains," he said. "Never seen anything like this. The size alone is impossible for native species." While they documented the tracks, I continued searching the surrounding area. Behind a cluster of boulders near the stream, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. A small pile of camping gear that didn't belong to the Rodriguez couple. I called Hayes over and pointed to my find. A torn backpack, fragments of a different tent, and a damaged camping stove lay partially buried under leaves and debris. The items were weathered, suggesting they'd been there for some time. "This isn't from the Rodriguez camp," I explained. "Different brands, different colors." Hayes crouched to examine the items. "How long have these been here?" "Hard to say exactly. Weeks, maybe months based on the weathering, but definitely not years." Charlie joined us, photographing the discovered items. Serial numbers might tell us where they came from, could match them against missing persons reports. As we continued searching, more scattered camping equipment emerged. A bent cooking pot half buried in silt, fragments of a sleeping bag caught in branches, a single hiking boot wedged between rocks. The items were scattered over a roughly 50-yard area, as if they'd been collected and brought to this location. "It's been hunting here for a while," I said quietly to Hayes, "bringing its kills to this spot." Hayes's expression darkened. "And we've had no reports of missing hikers in this area besides the Rodriguez couple." "None recently," I confirmed. "But this section is restricted. People who come here without permits might not be reported missing immediately if no one knows where they went." By mid-morning, Dr. Lewis and his assistant had prepared Sarah's body for transport. 4 search and rescue volunteers carefully carried the body bag up the ravine slope using a specialized litter designed for difficult terrain. The rest of us continued documenting evidence and searching the area. In a small cave-like depression formed by fallen logs and overgrown vegetation, Charlie discovered more human possessions: a water bottle with a faded label, scraps of clothing, and most disturbingly, a wallet containing identification for someone named Marcus Layton. The ID showed a Michigan address and was dated from the previous year. "We need to check if this person was reported missing," Hayes said, bagging the wallet as evidence, "and cross-reference any other missing persons reports from the surrounding counties over the past year." As noon approached, we gathered at the top of the ravine to consolidate our findings. The evidence painted a disturbing picture. A large, unidentified predator had established a hunting territory centered on this section of Timber Creek. possibly claiming multiple victims over an extended period. Hayes made the decision we all knew was coming. I'm officially closing this entire section of the park, effective immediately. No hikers, no campers, no day visitors until we identify and neutralize this threat. He turned to me. Miller, I want you to coordinate with the State Wildlife Department. We need experts out here as soon as possible to help identify what we're dealing with. I'll make the calls, I assured him, and I'd like to volunteer to guide their team when they arrive. I know this area better than most, and I've seen the evidence firsthand. Hayes nodded. Agreed. Wilson, I want you working with the investigation team to analyze everything we've collected today. See if we can establish a timeline for how long this thing has been active here. As the recovery team packed up our equipment and prepared to transport Sarah's body back to the trailhead, I took a final look around the forest. In daylight, with a dozen people around me, the woods should have felt safer than they had the previous night. Instead, knowing what we now did about the creature that considered this its territory, every shadow between the trees seemed to hold potential danger. The scattered camping gear from previous victims raised questions no one had voiced aloud yet. How many people had this thing killed without anyone knowing? And why hadn't we connected the dots sooner? On the hike back to the trailhead, I walked alongside Charlie, both of us quiet and contemplative. The weight of what we'd discovered hung over the entire group. I've requested Dr. Amanda Foster specifically, Charlie finally said, breaking the silence. She's the state's leading expert on predator behavior. If anyone can help identify what we're dealing with, it's her. How soon can she get here? I asked. She said she'd assemble a team and head out tomorrow morning. They should arrive by afternoon. I nodded, already planning what areas to show her first. We need to gather everything we know about this creature's behavior patterns, the territorial markings, the unusual tracks, the hunting strategy, and the sounds, Charlie added. Don't forget those strange vocalizations from the video. Those might be key to understanding how it lures victims. At the trailhead, the mood was somber as the medical examiner's van departed with Sarah's body. Hayes gathered everyone for a final briefing, thanking the search and rescue volunteers and instructing his deputies to begin setting up closure notices at all access points to the affected area. Miller, Wilson, I'll need your full reports by end of day, Hayes said. Include everything, no matter how unusual or seemingly insignificant. We need to build a complete picture of what we're dealing with. As the group dispersed to their vehicles, I stood looking back at the forest trail. Somewhere in those trees, a creature was waiting. Something that killed with calculated precision and marked its territory with deliberate intent. Whatever it was, it had already proven itself more dangerous than any predator I'd encountered in my career. Tomorrow, Dr. Foster and her team would arrive to help identify and track it. Until then, all we could do was analyze the evidence we'd gathered and make sure no one else ventured into its hunting grounds. Charlie touched my shoulder, breaking my reverie. Come on, we've got reports to write and calls to make. I nodded and turned away from the trail. The forest would wait for our return, as would the creature that called it home. 2 days had passed since we recovered Sarah Rodriguez's body from the ravine. The park remained closed to the public from the eastern trailhead all the way to Timber Creek, with sheriff's deputies stationed at key access points to turn away anyone who hadn't gotten the message. I spent most of that time buried in reports and phone calls, coordinating with various agencies while Charlie worked with Hayes to process the evidence we'd collected. I waited at the eastern access point parking lot, leaning against our truck as a small convoy of State Wildlife Department vehicles pulled in. 3 SUVs with official markings rolled to a stop, their tires crunching on the gravel. From the lead vehicle stepped a woman I recognized immediately as Dr. Amanda Foster. She moved with quick, purposeful steps toward me, extending her hand. Her light brown hair was pulled back in its characteristic tight ponytail, and she wore practical field clothes, cargo pants, hiking boots, and a light jacket with the Wildlife Department logo. Ranger Miller, she said, shaking my hand firmly. "Wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "Same here, Dr. Foster. Thanks for coming so quickly." She turned and gestured to the 4 people emerging from the other vehicles. "My team. Dr. Kaplan is our pathologist. Lynn is our tracking specialist. Michaels handles tech and surveillance, and Rodriguez is our field biologist." Each nodded as she introduced them. They looked professional and capable, already unloading equipment from their vehicles. "I reviewed all the materials you sent over," Dr. Foster said, pulling a tablet from her pack. "The tracks, the claw marks, the video footage, very unusual." "That's putting it mildly," I replied. "Nothing about this fits normal predator patterns." Dr. Foster nodded. "Which is why we're here with specialized equipment. If this is an exotic species or a severely diseased native animal, we need to identify it quickly." I helped her team sort through their gear while bringing her up to speed on what we'd learned since my last update. "We've confirmed the ID from the wallet found at the site," I explained. "Marcus Layton, age 28, reported missing last October after a solo hiking trip. His car was found at a trailhead about 10 miles from here, but search teams never located him. And now we know why," Dr. Foster said grimly. "Any other matches from the recovered items?" 2 more possible IDs from personal effects. Sheriff Hayes is still running them down, but it looks like we might have at least 3 previously unknown victims. Her team finished loading their equipment into backpacks: cameras, tracking devices, sample collection kits, and what looked like tranquilizer rifles. "Our plan?" she asked, shouldering her pack. "I'll take you to the kill site first. It's about a 90-minute hike from here. Charlie's meeting us there with some of the deputies." The hike in was quieter than 2 days ago. Without the urgency of a rescue operation, we moved at a steadier pace. Dr. Foster walked beside me at the front of the group, asking occasional questions about the terrain and previous sightings. "The tracks you photographed," she said as we crossed a small stream. "The proportions are what trouble me most. Too large for any known bear species in North America, and the gait pattern is all wrong." "What about an escaped exotic? Private collection, maybe?" She shook her head. "Possible, but unlikely. Large predators that escape captivity usually don't survive long in unfamiliar environments, and they certainly don't establish complex territorial patterns like what you've described. Disease, then? Something affecting normal behavior?" "That's more likely," she agreed. "Certain neurological conditions can dramatically alter predator behavior, but the size still doesn't match anything native to these mountains." When we reached the Rodriguez campsite, Charlie was already there with 2 deputies, maintaining a perimeter around the area. The blue tent remained untouched, now serving as a marker for the investigation. "The ravine is this way," I said, leading Dr. Foster and her team through the trees. "That's where we found the body and most of the evidence." As we walked, Dr. Foster's tracking specialist, Lynn, began examining signs I would have missed: broken twigs at odd heights, bark disturbances, and subtle depressions in the forest floor. "Something very large has been through here repeatedly," Lynn said, crouching to examine a section of disturbed earth. "Creating regular pathways, not typical for solitary predators." When we reached the ravine edge, Dr. Foster took her time surveying the scene before climbing down. The area looked different now. Flagging tape marked evidence locations, and the forest felt less threatening in daylight with armed personnel nearby. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. "These are the territorial markings," I said, pointing to the gouged trees surrounding the area where we'd found Sarah's body. Dr. Foster examined them closely, measuring their height and pattern with careful precision. 7 feet up, consistent depth and angle. These weren't made in passing. The animal stopped at each tree deliberately. Her pathologist, Dr. Kaplan, collected samples from the marks, scraping tiny amounts of residue into sterile containers. "Might give us DNA if we're lucky," he explained. "Predators sometimes leave cellular material when marking territory." We spent the next hour documenting everything about the site. Dr. Foster's tech specialist, Michaels, set up motion-activated cameras on trees surrounding the area, angling them to cover the approach paths and the ravine floor. These will trigger on movement and heat signatures, he explained as he finished the installation. Night vision capable, with satellite uplink to send images directly to our mobile lab. What about those tracks we found? I asked Dr. Foster, who was examining the area where we'd discovered the massive paw prints. Rain washed out most of the definition, she said, looking disappointed. But I've seen enough to confirm they don't match standard morphology for any native species. The elongation and claw pattern are particularly unusual. As her team finished setting up their equipment around the ravine, a radio call came in from one of Hayes's deputies who was patrolling the perimeter about half a mile north. "Miller, you copy?" The voice crackled through static. I pulled my radio from my belt. "Copy, go ahead." "We've got something strange up here. Large disturbance area with fresh animal remains. Might want to bring the wildlife team to check it out." I looked at Dr. Foster, who was already repacking her sample kit. "Coordinates?" I asked the deputy. He rattled off GPS numbers that Charlie quickly plotted on his map. "That's about 3/4 of a mile northeast from our position," Charlie said, "near that ridge with the rock outcropping." Dr. Foster gathered her team while I briefed Charlie on our plan. "You stay here with the other deputy and finish securing this site. We'll check out the new location and radio back what we find." The hike to the coordinates took us through increasingly dense forest before opening into a small clearing nestled against a rocky hillside. The deputy who had called it in stood at the edge, his expression grim as he pointed toward the center of the space. "Found it about 20 minutes ago," he said. "Wasn't here yesterday during our patrol." 2 deer carcasses lay in the middle of the clearing, their bodies torn open in a manner that made my stomach turn despite years of seeing animal kills. Dr. Foster moved forward cautiously, signaling for her team to fan out and secure the perimeter before approaching the remains. "Very fresh," she said, crouching beside the first carcass, no more than 3 or 4 hours old. The kills weren't typical predator work. Normal predators take down prey efficiently, then feed in recognizable patterns. These deer looked like they had been torn apart with excessive force, their rib cages splayed open and limbs wrenched at unnatural angles. "It wasn't hungry," Dr. Kaplan noted as he collected tissue samples. "Look how little has actually been consumed. This was about something else." Dr. Foster nodded. "Territorial display, perhaps, or practice." "Practice?" I asked. She looked up at me, her expression serious. "Some predators, particularly those with neurological issues, will kill beyond their feeding needs. Almost like they're perfecting their technique." The thought sent a chill through me. "You're saying it's learning?" "Possibly, or displaying dominance. Either way, this is concerning behavior." Lynn was examining the ground around the kills, placing small numbered markers beside tracks and other evidence. "It dragged these deer here from different directions," he said, pointing to drag marks in the soil. "They weren't killed here. They were collected and arranged." Dr. Foster joined him, studying the pattern. Deliberate positioning. The heads are both facing the same way, aligned with that rock formation. The systematic nature of the display was more disturbing than the kills themselves. This wasn't random predation. It showed planning and purpose. "We need to get cameras on this site immediately," Dr. Foster said to Michaels, who was already unpacking his equipment. "If it's establishing a new kill zone, it will likely return." While they set up surveillance, Dr. Foster pulled me aside. "This behavior suggests we're dealing with a highly territorial predator with possible neurological abnormalities. The fact that it's creating multiple kill sites within a confined area is extremely unusual." "What kind of animal are we talking about?" I asked. She shook her head. "I'm still not prepared to make that determination. The evidence is contradictory. The size suggests bear, but the behavior doesn't match any ursine patterns I've studied. The territorial marking is more feline, but the kills aren't consistent with big cats." Could it be more than one animal? Different predators in the same area? Unlikely, she replied. The territorial markings are consistent. Same height, same pattern, and multiple apex predators wouldn't tolerate each other in such close proximity. The team worked efficiently to document the new site, collecting samples and setting up more cameras. As late afternoon approached, the forest grew quieter, with fewer bird calls penetrating the canopy above us. We should set up our base camp before dark, Dr. Foster said, checking her watch. Preferably somewhere defensible, but still within range of our monitoring equipment. We selected a location about a quarter-mile from the kill site, a small plateau with good visibility and a rock face at our backs. The team quickly established a perimeter and began setting up their specialized equipment, including a portable lab station and communication array. This will monitor all our camera feeds and audio sensors, Michaels explained as he calibrated a satellite dish. We'll have real-time data from everywhere we've placed equipment. Dr. Foster had brought a sophisticated audio system that she placed at strategic points around our camp. These will pick up vocalizations beyond human hearing range, she said. Many predators communicate at frequencies we can't detect naturally. As dusk approached, the forest took on that special quality of silence that comes with the transition between day and night predators. Dr. Foster's team finished their setup and gathered around a small table where she had spread maps of the area. Based on the evidence, I believe the creature has established a territory of approximately 3 square miles, centered on the Upper Timber Creek watershed, she said, circling an area on the map. The multiple kill sites suggest it's patrolling regularly, probably along this ridgeline and down through these ravines. She turned to her team. Standard observation protocols tonight. 2-person watches, 4-hour rotations. No one leaves camp alone under any circumstances. I volunteered for the first watch alongside Lynn, the tracking specialist. As darkness settled over the forest, we positioned ourselves at the edge of camp with night vision equipment and radios. What do you think we're dealing with? I asked him quietly as we scanned the tree line. Lynn was silent for a moment before answering. In 20 years of tracking predators across 3 continents, I've never seen sign patterns like these. The closest comparison might be a juvenile male tiger establishing territory. But even that doesn't fit exactly. Dr. Foster seems reluctant to speculate. He nodded. That's her way. She won't commit to a theory until she has conclusive evidence. But off the record, I think we're dealing with something outside normal classification. Either a severe case of disease altering normal behavior or... He trailed off. Or what? Or something we haven't documented before. About an hour into our watch, one of the audio sensors began picking up something. Michaels, who was monitoring the equipment, called us over to listen. Getting this from sensor 3, near the first kill site, he said, adjusting the frequency. Through the headphones, I heard a series of low rhythmic sounds, pulsing tones that weren't quite vocalizations, but definitely weren't random forest noise either. My skin prickled with recognition. That's it, I said, taking off the headphones. That's the sound from the Rodriguez video. What Sarah heard before she walked into the trees. Dr. Foster listened carefully, her expression focused. It's structured, she said. Repeating pattern with slight variations, not typical of involuntary animal sounds. What does that mean? I asked. It means whatever is making those sounds is doing so deliberately, possibly as a lure or territorial announcement. A moment later, one of the motion cameras triggered an alert. Michaels pulled up the feed on his laptop, showing grainy night vision footage of movement at the edge of the deer kill site. Something large, he said, enhancing the image, moving just at the tree line. We crowded around the screen, trying to make out details in the green-tinted footage. Something was definitely moving between the trees, something big enough to disturb branches 7 feet off the ground. But it stayed just out of clear view, a shadow shifting between trunks. The audio sensors picked up more sounds, the same rhythmic pulses but louder now, interspersed with what sounded like low growls. "It knows we're here," Dr. Foster said quietly. "It's responding to our presence." Another camera triggered, this one closer to our camp. The movement was heading in our direction, circling around rather than approaching directly. "It's flanking us," Lynn observed, reaching for his rifle. Classic stalking behavior. Dr. Foster quickly mobilized her team, assigning positions around the camp perimeter. "Non-lethal measures only," she instructed, handing out tranquilizer rifles. "We need this specimen alive, if at all possible." I drew my sidearm, taking position alongside Dr. Foster at the eastern edge of our camp. The audio sensors continued picking up those strange, pulsing sounds, now coming from multiple directions. "It's trying to confuse us about its location," Dr. Foster said, adjusting her night vision goggles. "Very sophisticated hunting strategy." Through my own goggles, I scanned the forest edge, watching for movement. The undergrowth about 50 yards out swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. Something was moving parallel to our position, staying just concealed within the tree line. "Movement, 2 o'clock, I whispered to Dr. Foster, "just inside the trees." She raised her tranquilizer rifle, peering through its specialized scope. "I see it, large mass, moving deliberately, trying to get a clear shot." The creature continued its careful circuit of our camp, never fully exposing itself, but making no effort to hide its presence either. The message was clear. It was letting us know we were in its territory. Another camera triggered, this one at the north edge of our perimeter. On the monitor, we could see a large shadow pass directly in front of the lens, momentarily blocking the view entirely. Whatever it was close now, perhaps 30 yards from our position. Dr. Foster's team maintained discipline, holding their positions as the creature circled us. The pulsing sounds grew louder, now clearly audible without the sensors, echoing through the trees from changing directions. "It's hunting us," Dr. Foster said quietly, "testing our defenses." I kept my weapon ready, scanning the tree line methodically. For a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of something moving between two large pines. A massive shape that seemed to flow rather than walk, with what looked like patchy fur catching the ambient light. It was gone before I could focus clearly. "Did you see that?" I asked Dr. Foster. She nodded, her expression tense. "Partially. Not enough for identification." A sudden crash from the far side of camp drew our attention. One of the supply containers had been knocked over, sending equipment scattering across the ground. But no one was near it. The sound had come from an empty section of our perimeter. "It's trying to draw us out," Dr. Foster warned through her radio. "Everyone hold position." The night stretched on in this tense standoff, the creature circling, occasionally revealing parts of itself, but never enough for a clear shot or identification. The cameras caught glimpses, a large limb here, a shadow there, once what might have been part of a massive head with reflecting eyes. By midnight, the sounds had stopped, and the movement sensors went quiet. Dr. Foster maintained our alert status for another hour before cautiously reducing our posture to normal watch rotations. "It's established what it wanted to," she said as we regrouped at the center of camp. "Confirmed our presence and tested our reactions. Classic territorial behavior, but with unusual sophistication." "Will it be back?" I asked. "Absolutely," she replied with certainty. "It's clearly interested in us. The question is whether it perceives us as a threat to eliminate or as potential prey." Her team spent the next hour reviewing the footage and audio recordings, extracting what little data they could from the encounter. The images remained frustratingly inconclusive, showing parts of something large moving with deliberate care, but never a clear view of the whole creature. "Tomorrow, we'll track it," Dr. Foster announced. "Based on its movement patterns tonight, I believe we can identify the general direction of its den or resting area." As the team prepared for the remaining night watches, I couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter had gone exactly as the creature intended. It had studied us, tested us, but revealed almost nothing about itself in return. Whatever was hunting in these mountains, it wasn't just operating on instinct. The calculated nature of its movements, the deliberate sounds it made, the way it had circled our camp without fully exposing itself, all suggested an intelligence that made it far more dangerous than any normal predator. I took the final watch before dawn, scanning the silent forest with a growing certainty that our hunt was just beginning, and that the creature we sought was equally hunting us. The audio sensors continued to pick up those rhythmic sounds long after the creature's physical presence had faded from our perimeter. Even with no new motion alerts triggering the cameras, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched from the darkness. My 4-hour watch with Dr. Kaplan passed without further incident, but sleep came fitfully when my shift ended. I dozed in broken intervals, each snap of a twig or rustle of wind through the trees pulling me back to alertness. Just before dawn, I woke to Lynn shaking my shoulder. "One of the remote sensors picked up movement," he said quietly. "Dr. Foster wants everyone ready to move in 15 minutes. I pulled myself up from my sleeping bag, muscles aching from the tension of the previous day. The eastern sky showed the first hints of gray light as the team gathered around Michaels's monitoring station. He pointed to a digital map displayed on his tablet. "Audio sensor 7 picked up those same rhythmic sounds about 20 minutes ago," he explained. "Then camera 9 captured this." He played a short video clip showing a large shadow moving between trees, briefly illuminated by the camera's infrared. The creature was moving with purpose, heading northwest from our position. "It's returning to its den," Dr. Foster said, studying the footage. "Dawn is approaching, and most predators retreat to secure locations during daylight hours." She turned to Lynn. "Can you track it from these coordinates?" Lynn nodded, already pulling equipment from his pack. "If it's moving at a consistent pace, we should be able to follow at a safe distance." Dr. Foster outlined the plan while we quickly broke camp. We would track the creature to its daytime resting place, observe from a safe distance, and attempt tranquilization only under optimal conditions. She emphasized that safety remained our priority, no unnecessary risks. Within 20 minutes, we were moving through the forest in tight formation. Lynn took point, following signs that would have been invisible to me. Slight depressions in the forest floor, broken pine needles, and occasional fur caught on low branches. Dr. Foster walked beside me, her tranquilizer rifle ready as she scanned the woods ahead. "The tracks are changing," Lynn said after we'd covered about a mile. "It's moving more confidently here, following what appears to be a regular path." The forest was thinning as we gained elevation, transitioning to rockier terrain. We moved more cautiously now, staying low and using natural cover. Lynn held up his hand, stopping us behind a cluster of boulders. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a tree trunk about 10 feet ahead. Deep gouges marked the bark at the now familiar 7-foot height. But these marks were different. Not the territorial warnings we'd seen before, but something more like a signpost. "It's marking a route," Dr. Foster said, examining the scratches. "These are older and repeated. This is a path it travels regularly." We continued following these markers, moving uphill toward a rocky ridge. The sun had fully risen now, filtering through the trees and warming the cool morning air. The gouged trees appeared every 100 yards or so, creating a clear trail through the increasingly rugged landscape. As we approached the ridge, Lynn crouched suddenly, signaling for us to stop. He pointed toward a dark opening about 50 yards ahead, a cave entrance partly hidden by fallen rocks and vegetation. "That's it," he whispered. "The trail leads directly there." Dr. Foster studied the cave entrance through binoculars. "Natural limestone formation," she said. "Likely part of a larger system. Good shelter for a large predator." She assembled her team in a tight circle, laying out a topographical map on a flat rock. "We'll approach from multiple angles," she explained, marking positions. "Michaels set up remote cameras here and here to monitor the entrance. Rodriguez and Kaplan establish a perimeter 20 yards out. Lynn, you'll accompany me and Ranger Miller for closer inspection." Dr. Foster checked her tranquilizer rifle. Remember, we want this specimen alive if at all possible. Use lethal force only as an absolute last resort. I checked my sidearm, hoping I wouldn't need it. The morning light made the forest seem less threatening than it had during the night, but the cave mouth ahead remained an ominous black void against the sunlit rocks. We moved into position carefully, with Michaels deploying small cameras that would transmit to his tablet. Once the perimeter was established, Dr. Foster, Lynn, and I began our cautious approach to the cave entrance. The ground around the opening told a grim story. Bones littered the area, mostly deer and elk, their ends gnawed and splintered. Lynn pointed out human-made items partially buried in the dirt, a crushed metal water bottle, fragments of synthetic fabric, and what appeared to be a bent hiking pole. This confirms it's the same creature that attacked the hikers, I said quietly, examining a torn backpack strap. It's been bringing items back to its den. Dr. Foster nodded grimly. The behavior fits. Predators that develop a taste for human prey often collect items associated with their kills. Lynn moved closer to the cave entrance, studying the ground with intense focus. These tracks are fresh, he whispered. It definitely went in recently. Dr. Foster signaled for us to stay put while she retrieved something from her pack, a small thermal imaging device that she pointed toward the cave opening. Heat signature approximately 30 feet inside, she confirmed. Large mass, consistent with a bear-sized animal. It appears to be stationary. She turned to me. We need to confirm visual identification without provoking it. Ideas? I considered our options. If it just returned to its den, it might be settling into rest. We could set up an observation post here and wait for better conditions. Dr. Foster seemed about to agree when a low, rhythmic sound emerged from the cave. The same pulsing tones we'd heard on the Rodriguez video and through our sensors the previous night. The sound echoed slightly, amplified by the cave walls. "It knows we're here," Lynn whispered, tightening his grip on his rifle. Dr. Foster raised her hand for silence, listening intently. The pulsing sound continued for several seconds, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound had been. "We need to back up," Dr. Foster said quietly. "Establish a safer observation distance." We began moving backward slowly, maintaining visual contact with the cave entrance. We had retreated perhaps 10 yards when movement caught my eye. A massive form shifting in the shadows just inside the cave mouth. "Hold position," Dr. Foster whispered, raising her tranquilizer rifle to her shoulder. "I need a clear shot if it emerges." The creature moved again, edging closer to the entrance. I caught glimpses of matted fur and an outline far larger than any bear I'd encountered in 15 years of ranger work. It seemed to hesitate at the threshold between darkness and daylight. Then it stepped forward into the morning sun, and I finally saw what had been stalking these mountains. It was a grizzly bear, or had been once. But disease had transformed it into something barely recognizable. Its massive frame, easily 9 feet tall when standing, was emaciated in places yet swollen in others, creating a distorted silhouette. Patchy fur revealed skin with strange growths and discoloration. Its face showed the worst transformation. One eye clouded and weeping, the other unnaturally bright and alert. Its muzzle was distorted, pulled into an almost permanent snarl by what appeared to be painful swellings along its jaw. "My God," Dr. Foster breathed, keeping her rifle trained on the creature. "Advanced stage of chronic wasting disease combined with what looks like rabies." The bear swung its massive head toward us, that one good eye fixing on our position with unnerving intelligence. It opened its mouth, revealing yellowed teeth and inflamed gums, and emitted that same rhythmic pulsing sound we'd heard before, not a roar or growl, but something more deliberate. The neurological damage has affected its vocalization centers, Dr. Foster explained in a whisper. It's producing those sounds intentionally, possibly as a hunting technique. The bear took another step forward, its movements oddly fluid despite its diseased appearance. It showed none of the sluggishness or confusion typical of animals with advanced neurological conditions. "I'm going to try to tranquilize it," Dr. Foster said, adjusting her aim. "The dose is calculated for a healthy bear of this size. The disease might affect how quickly it takes effect." She squeezed the trigger, and the dart flew true, striking the bear in the shoulder. The creature jerked at the impact, then reached up with surprising dexterity and pulled the dart out with its claws. "That's not normal behavior," Dr. Foster said tensely. "Most animals don't understand or remove darts." The bear stared at the dart for a moment before dropping it. Then it fixed that unnervingly intelligent gaze back on us. A deep rumble built in its chest, not the pulsing sound from before, but a more traditional growl that gradually increased in volume. "The tranquilizer should take effect within minutes," Dr. Foster said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "We need to maintain this distance and wait." But the bear showed no signs of slowing. Instead, it dropped to all fours and began a deliberate approach, its massive paws leaving deep impressions in the soft earth. Its movements had a calculated quality that sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't the random aggression of a rabid animal or the confusion of a creature with brain disease. It was hunting us. "Something's wrong," Lynn said. "It should be showing some effects by now." Dr. Foster loaded another dart. "The disease might be affecting drug absorption. I'll try once more with a higher dose." She fired again, and again the dart found its mark. This time the bear didn't bother removing it, seemingly focused entirely on closing the distance between us. It increased its pace, moving with surprising speed for such a large animal. "It's not working," I said, drawing my sidearm. "We need to pull back." Dr. Foster lowered her tranquilizer rifle with visible reluctance. The combined diseases must have altered its physiology more than I anticipated. "Start backing toward the perimeter, slowly." We began retreating, maintaining eye contact with the advancing bear. It matched our pace exactly, neither gaining nor losing ground, like it was toying with us. Then it made that pulsing sound again, and to my horror I heard a response from somewhere to our right. The same rhythmic pattern echoed back. "That's one of our audio sensors," Michaels called from his position. "It's mimicking the sound." The realization struck me like a physical blow. The creature had learned to replicate the sounds from our equipment, using our own technology against us. The intelligence this implied was far beyond normal bear behavior, even accounting for disease. When we were approximately 20 yards from the cave entrance, the bear suddenly stopped. For a brief moment, I thought the tranquilizer might finally be taking effect. Then it reared up on its hind legs, standing at its full terrifying height, and let out a roar that echoed across the ridge. "It's charging!" Lynn shouted as the bear dropped back to all fours and surged forward with explosive speed. Dr. Foster scrambled backward, still trying to maintain enough distance for the tranquilizer to work. "Non-lethal! Try to—" Her words cut off as the bear closed the gap with unbelievable quickness. It was moving directly toward her, jaws open and those diseased eyes fixed on its target. I didn't hesitate. I raised my sidearm, aimed for the center mass, and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The rounds hit their mark, causing the bear to falter momentarily, but they weren't enough to stop its charge. The bear redirected toward me now, perhaps recognizing the greater threat. I continued firing, backing away as quickly as I could while maintaining my aim. Behind me, I heard Lynn's rifle crack twice. The combined fire finally had an effect. The bear slowed, dark blood matting its already patchy fur. It stood swaying for a moment, that intelligent eye still fixed on me with what looked unnervingly like hatred. Then it collapsed forward, its massive body hitting the ground with enough force to shake the earth beneath my feet. For several tense seconds, no one moved. Then Dr. Foster approached cautiously, her tranquilizer rifle exchanged for a heavy caliber handgun. "Stay back," she warned. Even mortally wounded, it could still be dangerous. She circled the fallen creature carefully, watching for any signs of movement. When she was confident it posed no further threat, she holstered her weapon and switched to scientific observation. "It's dead," she confirmed, turning to her team. "Kaplan, bring the sampling kit. We need to collect tissues immediately." The tense silence that had gripped us during the encounter gave way to controlled activity. Dr. Foster's team moved with practiced efficiency, photographing the creature from multiple angles before beginning their sample collection. I stood a short distance away, my sidearm still drawn as I processed what had just happened. The bear's size alone was exceptional, easily 1,000 pounds despite the wasting effects of disease. But it was the intelligence it had displayed that truly shook me. The calculated hunting strategy, the ability to remove tranquilizer darts, the mimicry of our equipment sounds. None of that fit with normal bear behavior, even accounting for rabies. Dr. Foster joined me after supervising the initial sample collection. "You made the right call," she said quietly. "That bear wasn't going to be taken alive. The diseases had progressed too far." "What exactly are we looking at?" I asked, holstering my weapon. "I've dealt with rabid animals before, but nothing like this." She shook her head, looking back at the massive carcass. A perfect storm of neurological conditions. Chronic wasting disease typically affects deer and elk, but it can cross to bears when they feed on infected carcasses. Combined with rabies, it created something unprecedented. The intelligence it showed. The diseases affected different parts of the brain in conflicting ways, she explained. Chronic wasting disease typically causes lethargy and confusion, while rabies can create hyperaggression. But in this case, they seem to have enhanced certain cognitive functions while destroying others. The predatory instinct remained intact, even enhanced, while social behaviors and fear responses were eliminated. "Creating a perfect predator," I said, echoing the phrase from the chapter beat. "In a way, yes." It lost the natural caution that keeps predators from targeting humans, while retaining the hunting intelligence that makes apex predators so effective. And it learned from each encounter, adapting its techniques based on previous successes. Dr. Kaplan approached us, holding several sealed sample containers. "Preliminary examination confirms both conditions," he reported. "The brain tissue shows clear signs of both diseases in advanced stages. I've never seen anything like the combination." "Could there be others?" I asked, the thought sending a chill through me. Dr. Foster frowned. "Possible, but unlikely. This combination of factors, both diseases progressing simultaneously, the bear surviving long enough for the neurological changes to take hold, is extremely rare. But we'll need to test other wildlife in the area to be certain." I looked toward the cave entrance. "We should check the den. There might be more evidence inside." Dr. Foster nodded. "Rodriguez, get the high-powered lights. Lynn, you and Miller take point. Everyone else maintain perimeter security." Lynn and I approached the cave entrance cautiously, powerful flashlights cutting through the darkness. The tunnel extended about 30 feet before opening into a larger chamber. The stench was overwhelming, a mixture of decay, animal musk, and something sickly sweet that I assumed came from the bear's diseased condition. Our lights revealed a grim collection. Animal bones were scattered throughout the chamber, some old and yellowed, others still carrying strips of flesh. More disturbing were the human artifacts, torn backpacks, shredded clothing, a single hiking boot that matched the description of Marcus Layton's gear. "It was collecting trophies," Lynn said quietly, playing his light over a pile of items that had been arranged almost deliberately against one wall. The pile contained items from at least 3 different hikers, based on the varied styles and colors of the equipment. A blue sleeping bag, torn open, but recognizable as different from the Rodriguez's gear. A red backpack with Canadian flag patches. A silver thermal blanket, crumpled but still partially intact. "This confirms our suspicions about the previous missing hikers," I said, photographing the collection. It was specifically targeting humans, not just opportunistically attacking them. Lynn nodded grimly. And bringing items back to its den. That's not typical bear behavior. Dr. Foster joined us, surveying the scene with clinical detachment. The diseases created a hybrid behavior pattern. Part bear, part something else entirely. The territorial marking, the collection of items, the deliberate hunting strategy, it developed its own unique patterns. We documented everything thoroughly, collecting items that might help identify previous victims. The cave extended further back into the hillside, but a partial collapse blocked access to the deeper sections. Dr. Foster decided against clearing it, determining we had sufficient evidence from the main chamber. Back outside, the team had finished processing the bear's carcass. Dr. Kaplan had taken extensive tissue samples for laboratory analysis, while Michaels documented every aspect of the creature's unusual physical condition. We'll need to remove the entire carcass, Dr. Foster decided. I want a full necropsy performed in controlled conditions. She used her satellite phone to call for helicopter transport, explaining the situation to her department superiors. While we waited, we gathered our evidence and prepared the site for evacuation. I stood looking at the massive bear, trying to reconcile its appearance with the almost supernatural presence it had projected during our nighttime encounters. In death, despite its diseased condition, it was recognizably a grizzly, a known quantity, a natural creature, not the monster it had seemed in the darkness. It's still hard to believe one animal caused all this, I said to Dr. Foster as we finished securing the site. She nodded, her scientific detachment momentarily giving way to something more personal. That's what makes these cases so disturbing. We think we understand the natural world, can predict and categorize it. Then something like this happens. A random combination of factors creating something our existing models can't explain. The perfect predator hiding in plain sight, I said. Not perfect, she corrected, looking at the dead bear. Just uniquely dangerous because it was operating outside our understanding. We expect predators to behave according to established patterns. This one wrote its own rule book. The helicopter arrived mid-afternoon, hovering above the clearing as the recovery team prepared the bear's carcass for transport. The massive body was secured in a heavy-duty sling, then carefully lifted away to be taken to Dr. Foster's research facility. As I watched it disappear into the distance, I felt a complex mixture of relief and disquiet. The immediate threat was eliminated, but the implications lingered. Nature, which I'd spent my career studying and protecting, still held mysteries capable of upending everything we thought we understood. Dr. Foster's team packed up their equipment while I radioed Sheriff Hayes to report 3 weeks after we killed the bear. I found myself staring at a stack of incident reports on my desk that stood nearly 2 inches tall. The paperwork from what was now officially called the Timber Creek incident had consumed most of my waking hours since we'd returned from the mountain. My official report had gone through 5 revisions, each one more detailed than the last, as Dr. Foster's laboratory findings revealed additional information about what we'd encountered. I flipped open the latest analysis, which had arrived by courier that morning. The technical language was dense, but the conclusions were clear enough. The bear had suffered from an extraordinarily rare combination of chronic wasting disease and rabies. The photograph attached showed a cross-section of the creature's brain, with visible lesions throughout the cerebral tissue. Yellow highlighting marked areas of particular concern. The phone on my desk rang. I recognized the number for the State Wildlife Research Center. Ranger Miller, I answered. Dave, it's Amanda Foster. Her voice carried the precise, measured tone I'd come to associate with her scientific detachment. Did you receive the final pathology report? Just looking at it now, I said, turning to the next page of dense medical terminology. Not sure I understand all the technical details. She made a small sound that might have been a laugh. The simplified version is that we've never documented anything like this before. The combination of diseases created changes in the brain structure that essentially rewired its hunting behaviors while eliminating natural caution, making it target humans specifically, I said. remembering the cave with its collected trophies. Exactly. The rabies virus affected the limbic system while the chronic wasting disease damaged the cerebrum. Together, they enhanced predatory function while destroying the normal limitations on aggression. I turned to the recommendation section of the report. Any chance there are others? That's actually why I called, she said. We've completed testing on 27 other bears and over 50 deer and elk in the affected area. All negative. This appears to have been a genuinely isolated case. I felt relief wash through me. The thought of multiple predators with the same condition had haunted my dreams since we'd returned from the mountain. The probability factors make it extremely unlikely to occur again, she continued. This bear likely contracted chronic wasting disease from feeding on infected deer carcasses, then was later exposed to rabies, possibly from a raccoon or fox. The fact that it survived long enough for both diseases to progress simultaneously instead of simply dying quickly. The odds are astronomical. So we caught lightning in a bottle, I said. Essentially, yes. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be prepared for similar anomalies in the future. After finishing the call with Dr. Foster, I headed to the conference room where Charlie was helping me organize a training session for the other rangers in our district. We had spent the past week developing new protocols for identifying and responding to animals showing signs of neurological compromise. Charlie looked up from arranging handout materials as I entered. How's the final report looking? Conclusive. The lab confirmed our bear was a 1 in a million case. Testing on other wildlife came back negative. He nodded, relief visible in his expression. That's something, at least. Rangers from 3 districts began filing into the room. I recognized most of them, experienced professionals who had spent years in these mountains. The mood was somber as they took their seats. Word about what had happened at Timber Creek had spread quickly through the service, taking on an almost mythical quality in the retelling. I waited until everyone was seated before beginning. Thanks for coming. As you all know, 3 weeks ago we encountered an unusual predator situation in the Timber Creek area that resulted in 1 fatality and 1 injury to civilians. For the next hour, Charlie and I walked them through everything we had learned. I explained the behavioral patterns we had observed, the territorial marking, the deliberate luring techniques, the collection of trophies. Charlie covered the physical evidence, showing photographs of the tracks, claw marks, and the creature itself. The key takeaway, I said as we neared the end of the presentation, is that we need to adjust our response protocols for reported predator encounters. What we previously dismissed as exaggeration or misidentification might be early warning signs of abnormal behavior. A ranger from the Northern District raised her hand. So every time a hiker claims they saw something weird, we're supposed to mount a full investigation? Not exactly, I replied, but we need to cross-reference reports more carefully. Look for patterns in specific areas. If multiple hikers report unusual sounds or behavior from wildlife in the same region, that warrants closer attention. We distributed the new protocol manuals I had developed with Dr. Foster's input. They included updated reporting forms, behavioral assessment checklists, and emergency response procedures. We've also secured funding for additional emergency communication equipment, Charlie added. Solar-powered emergency beacons will be installed at major trail junctions in remote areas by the end of the month, and all rangers will now carry satellite communicators during backcountry patrols. After the training session, I drove to Memorial Hospital in Riverbrook. I had visited Chris Rodriguez twice since the incident, watching his physical recovery progress while his emotional state remained fragile. Today would likely be my last visit before he returned home to his family in Colorado. I found him sitting by the window in his room, staring at the mountains visible in the distance. The scratches on his face had begun to heal, pink lines replacing the angry red gashes. His leg was still bandaged where the bear had clawed him, but he could walk with assistance now. "Ranger Miller," he said, turning at the sound of my entrance. His voice was stronger than it had been during my last visit. "Any news?" I pulled up a chair beside him. "The investigation is officially closed. We've confirmed it was a grizzly with an extremely rare combination of diseases that altered its brain function. He nodded slowly, his eyes drifting back to the window. Doesn't change much for me. I know, I said quietly. We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again. The doctors say I can go home next week. Physically, I'm healing well. He tapped his temple. Up here is another story. Have you been talking with someone? I asked. Yeah, the hospital has a trauma counselor. She says it'll take time. His voice broke slightly. Sarah's parents came by yesterday. They don't blame me, but I keep thinking there must have been something I could have done differently. There wasn't, I said firmly. Dr. Foster's analysis showed the bear had developed specific luring techniques. Those sounds it made triggered an almost hypnotic response in some people. Sarah couldn't have resisted that pull. He looked at me, his eyes searching for reassurance. You really believe that? I do, I said, and meant it. The combination of diseases created something unpredictable, something no one could have prepared for. Before leaving, I gave him my card with my personal cell number written on the back. If you ever need to talk or if you have questions later, call me, day or night. He took the card, tucking it carefully into his wallet. Thank you for everything. The following week, Sheriff Hayes and I held a joint press conference announcing the reopening of the Timber Creek area. Hayes handled most of the questions, presenting the situation as an unfortunate but resolved wildlife incident. I provided technical details about the new safety measures being implemented throughout the park. While this was an isolated incident, I explained to the gathered reporters, it has prompted us to enhance our emergency response capabilities throughout the wilderness areas. New communication beacons have been installed at major trail junctions, and additional ranger patrols will focus on remote camping zones. A reporter from the local paper raised her hand. Some online forums are suggesting this wasn't a bear at all, but something unnatural. Care to comment? I had expected this question. The incident had sparked numerous conspiracy theories online, with some suggesting everything from escaped government experiments to supernatural creatures. The physical evidence is conclusive, I said firmly. Laboratory analysis confirmed this was a grizzly bear suffering from a combination of diseases that altered its behavior. Nothing more, nothing less. After the press conference, I returned to the ranger station to find Charlie reviewing permit applications for the coming weekend. With the Timber Creek area reopening, we expected an influx of hikers and campers eager to explore the previously restricted zone. How many so far? I asked, looking over his shoulder at the stack of forms. 17 for tomorrow alone, he said, shaking his head. Nothing like a predator attack to make people want to visit an area. Human nature, I replied. Make something forbidden and suddenly everyone wants to see it. I've been marking all Timber Creek permits for special briefing, he said, pointing to a red stamp at the top of several applications. Figured you'd want to handle those personally. I nodded. Good call. The next morning, I arrived at the station early to prepare for the day's permit briefings. The first applicants were a young couple in their 20s. Equipped with high-end gear that still had the shine of minimal use. They wanted to camp near Timber Creek for 2 nights. That's a challenging area, I said, spreading a topographical map on the counter between us. The terrain is steep and weather can change rapidly. The man, Jason according to his application, leaned forward eagerly. We heard that's where the attack happened. Is it true the bear was collecting human trophies? I felt a flash of irritation but kept my expression neutral. There was an incident involving an abnormal predator, yes, which is precisely why I want to make sure you're properly prepared if you're heading into that area. I spent the next 30 minutes walking them through specific safety protocols, proper food storage, emergency communication procedures, and how to recognize signs of predator activity. I emphasized the importance of staying on marked trails and registering accurate camping locations. The new emergency beacons are located here, here, and here, I said, marking the map with a highlighter. If you encounter any emergency, they provide direct communication with Ranger Dispatch. The woman, Emily, seemed to be taking the information seriously, asking thoughtful questions about what to do if they became lost or injured. Jason's enthusiasm dampened somewhat as the reality of backcountry risks sank in. Maybe we should consider one of the established campgrounds for our first trip, Emily suggested to her partner after my briefing. Jason looked disappointed but nodded. Probably smart. We can work up to the more remote stuff. I felt a wave of relief as I helped them select an alternative site with proper facilities and easier access. Before they left, I provided them with trail maps and information about ranger-led hikes where they could gain experience under supervision. Throughout the day, I conducted similar briefings for other permit applicants. Some, like Jason and Emily, reconsidered their plans when faced with the realities of backcountry camping. Others proceeded with their permits, but with a more serious understanding of the preparation required. By late afternoon, the rush had subsided, and I took the opportunity to head out on patrol. Charlie offered to join me, but I told him I wanted to do this one alone. He understood without needing further explanation. I drove to the eastern access point and parked at the now familiar trailhead. The parking area was half full, mostly day hikers enjoying the beautiful weather. I checked the trail register, noting with approval that everyone had signed in with clear destinations and expected return times. As I hiked up the main trail, I found myself studying the forest with new eyes. The same trees I had passed countless times before now revealed subtle details I had previously overlooked. Signs of wildlife passage, variations in vegetation that indicated different soil conditions, the way sound traveled through certain sections. When I reached the junction where the path split toward Timber Creek, I paused. The new emergency beacon gleamed at the trail intersection, its solar panel angled to catch maximum sunlight. A fresh sign had replaced the old warning, now including instructions for emergency communication and clearer cautions about wildlife safety. I continued along the main trail, nodding to hikers I passed. Most were well equipped and moving in groups, following proper wilderness etiquette. Near Little Eagle Lake, I encountered a family setting up camp in a designated area. The father was carefully hanging their food bag from a tree branch, well away from their tent. "Good technique," I commented as I approached, identifying myself. "Most people don't get the height right." He smiled, looking pleased at the recognition. "Read the new safety pamphlets front to back before we came out. Figured it's better to be overcautious than sorry." I spent a few minutes chatting with the family, answering their questions about local wildlife and pointing out interesting features they might want to explore during their stay. The children listened wide-eyed as I explained how to identify different animal tracks they might find around the lake. As afternoon began to fade toward evening, I made my way back toward the trailhead. The forest felt different now, not in the ominous way it had during the height of the incident, but with a deeper complexity I hadn't fully appreciated before. I paused at a viewpoint overlooking the valley, watching as golden sunlight illuminated the peaks in the distance. The mountains hadn't changed, but my perception of them had. I now understood on a fundamental level that the wilderness wasn't simply a playground or a postcard view. It was a living system, complex and sometimes unpredictable, capable of producing situations beyond our ready understanding. The radio at my belt crackled with a routine check-in from dispatch. I confirmed my location and estimated time of return, the familiar protocol now carrying new significance. These mountains deserved respect, not fear, but a clear-eyed acknowledgement of both their beauty and their capacity for danger. When I returned to the ranger station at dusk, I found Charlie finishing up the day's paperwork. He looked up as I entered. "How was it out there?" he asked. "Good," I replied, hanging my hat on the rack. "Busy but orderly. Saw lots of folks actually following the safety guidelines for once." "Amazing what a little mortal danger will do for compliance rates," he said, with a hint of his dry humor. "Should drop significantly by next month." Then we'll just have to keep reminding them, I said. After Charlie left, I remained at my desk, reviewing patrol schedules for the coming week. My attention drifted to a framed photograph on the wall, a panoramic view of the mountain range taken years ago when I first joined the service. I remembered the sense of wonder I'd felt then, the comfortable confidence that I understood these mountains and my place within them. That naive certainty was gone now, replaced by something more complex. I no longer saw the wilderness as something I could fully know or predict, but rather as something to approach with humility and constant attention. Not a puzzle to be solved, but a reality to be respected on its own terms. When new hikers came seeking adventure in these mountains, I would give them maps and guidelines, equipment checks, and safety briefings. But the most important thing I could offer was this hard-won perspective, that the wilderness remained wild not because we allowed it to be, but because that was its fundamental nature. Beautiful and awe-inspiring, occasionally dangerous, and never entirely predictable.